Welcome back to the channel. This is Trendy Storm and you're watching third and final part of What If Naruto defeated Danzo to become Hokage. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to the channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
As Naruto was freed from the Kyuubi's cage and returned to reality, the unresponsive Uchiha by the gate continued to gaze at the Kyuubi no Yuko's malevolent form. Itachi said, "Kyuubi, this is the most fitting form of subjugation to one such as yourself." The Kyuubi snarled scornfully at the human in front of it. What feeds into hatred? What is a sign of peace? Since I was a young child, growing up in the chaos of the battlefield, this has been on my mind. Growing up, I was a peace lover, following the Senju's teachings about the will of fire, their unfathomable unity and harmony. Instead of paying attention to what my father said, I was impressed by the wisdom and ideology of the Sandaime Hokage. Senju and Uchiha's rift kept Konoha as a whole apart for a very long time. There are families that are rivaling, isolating one another through discriminatory practices that completely destroyed our home from the inside out. Despite the temporary rope bridges, I can now finally see a strong bridge that will span the gap. I can see that it is feasible because of him. This is the reason Naruto was my final resort when it came to testing out my theory and imparting an imprint of my spiritual energy. As the descendants of the Rakudo Sennin, it is through us that the wish of our ancestors will one day be fulfilled. That is, understanding one another. As the legacy of Rakudo Sennin himself, rather than as the offspring of the Uchiha and Senju. Naruto had been staring at his room's ceiling while he considered the previous words that Itachi had spoken to him. New Rakudo Sennin, what did he mean? That night, Naruto got out of bed and left the little hut where Shima and Fukasaku were staying. After exiting, he made his way to the closest cliffside where he sat down and gazed up at the chilly night sky. A recognizable voice called out, "Can't sleep, Naruto." "Chan?" When Naruto turned around, he noticed Fukasaku was awake as well, and the elderly toad was seated next to him. Naruto nodded. "No, I was bothered by what happened during the moments of my facing with the Kyuubi." Fukasaku asked, "Does it have to do with the obtained control over it?" Naruto muttered, "In a way, yes, I want to know what exactly was Itachi saying about me being the new Rakudo Sennin, that and how come I can control the Kyuubi better." Then he recalled the harsh remarks made by the Kyuubi, which ridiculed Jiraiya's memory in addition to mocking him and his ideals. Naruto could feel his temper rising with every passing second. Fukasaku replied, putting his front legs on his back and staring into the white moon that lit the night. "It may be just a speculation on my part, Naruto Chan, but I believe it has something to do with the fact that the Uchiha and the Senju were the direct descendants of the Rakudo Sennin himself. We know that the origin of the Biju came from the day that the Rakudo Sennin had split of the power of the Jubi into 9 different creatures and that the descendants of the Rakudo Sennin have shown capability in controlling the tailed beasts, given the records of the battles between Uchiha Madara and Senju Hashirama." Fukasaku went on while Naruto nodded in agreement. If it came to that, those two had something in common yet different from the Rakudo Sennin. It is said that the direct descendants of the Rakudo Sennin inherited parts of a whole, as they say, the spiritual energies of the Uchiha and the physical energy of the Senju. Naruto then raised his eyebrows in confusion as Fukasaku, "As you know, those are the energies that make up chakra. And if anything were to go by when involving something ambitious as say, splitting the Jubi apart, then chakra would be the most obvious thing that would be contaminated in each of the existing Biju. Simply put, the chakra that the Rakudo Sennin had used on the Jubi could have had a seemingly intended side effect of the descendants showing control to the Biju whose genes were strong enough to manifest. In this case, it was Senju Hashirama and Uchiha Madara. One who can control the Biju using his life force, the other using chakra directed from his eyes. That contamination of chakra from the Rakudo Sennin to the Biju is what probably allowed you to control the beast within you. But it still hasn't explained about me being what Itachi said. I didn't have the slightest sliver of talent that allowed me to control my beast." Fukasaku nodded. "Think about it, Naruto Chan. The only thing consistent about the gifts that each of the brothers had was the Rakudo Sennin's chakras, as time passed. Many of his traits either dwindled or varied to another. The only thing that remained consistent coming from him were the chakras that were separated. It remained as the single most consistent trait that each of the clan's posses. And it probably still continues to this era. Itachi-san must have been questioning the same thing." Fukasaku continued, "However, compared to the real Rakudo Sennin, your chakra is somewhat only a copy, and no matter how much a plagiarist is good in copying a work, it will still have a different structure inside. Do you understand? You are a living hypothesis. A theory waiting to be proven. Unless you get to control the Biju itself with the chakra given to you, I cannot say that it will work flawlessly, as it cannot be proven until we can test it. The existence of the Rakuto Sennin in ages past was filled with mystery and near mythical in nature, so it would be very hard to prove that with a chakra signature that is as close to the Sennin as possible that you can control the Biju. The elder toad smiled at the blonde as well and turned to face the night sky. This time, it was the elder's turn to ask Naruto, "Have you found out the answer in your quest yet, Naruto?" "Chan?" Naruto replied, "I think I get it now. Thanks Fukasaku. Sensei, it really cleared my head there." Shaking his head, Naruto kept searching outside, saying, "No, I haven't. I'm sure, I'll find it someday." Naruto smiled a little sad-faced. One thing he muttered to himself the entire time he was walking back towards the hut was, "Someday." For the final time, he gazed into the night, feeling as though something significant was drawing nearer every day and that a wave of anxiety was rising inside of him. Kumo. Killer E was standing close to his office window overlooking the cliffside. He peered down below, where his subordinates had started to make their way through the busy metropolis of the most formidable shinobi village at the moment. Kumo was growing nervous. After the treaty was signed and the Six-Nation Alliance was fully formed, 4 months had passed, and the elemental countries had grown in a silent but hostile environment ever since. There was an uneasy feeling as villages all around the Godaikoku started to block trade routes everywhere, hoarding resources left and right, and by the beginning of the 4th month, the number of traveling merchants started to decline. The Hokage turned to face his brother, who was kneeling in front of him with his hands on the back of his head, as he watched his soldiers gathering in front of his building. "Hokage. Sama, the troops that you have requested have arrived." The Hokage just nodded before leaving in silence. Curious about the Hokage's behavior, Darui was about to inquire, but Killer B interrupted. "Yo bro, why so gloom? It's as if you're walking to your doom." Just before he opened the door, the Hokage paused and turned back to face his brother. "B, you have known just how much I have loved my village and my country more than anyone. That's why I wanted to create a strong nation, to oppose those that try to trample our people, our pride. It is a strength that I wanted to attain ever since I was a mere chunin, after discovering the news of a monstrous shinobi that existed in Konoha during the Third Great Shinobi War. I grew fearful the day that Konoha might one day turn their sights here. I realized just how the strong dictate this world. But now..." The Hokage lifted his right hand, revealing a little of his gauntlet as the sleeve slid down. "It seems that even the strong can be opposed and loathed at most," the Hokage said, glancing at his hand as if it were something to be disgusted of. "I've realized that the mistake that I caused of focusing solely on our country and causing such crimes everywhere." The Hokage continued at that point, but it didn't mean that I should wallow in that guilt. There is not a day after the summit that I wished for this war to have never happened. But it has, so I have no other choice but to fight in it. I am the Hokage after all, and putting up a weak front for my people to see would be a reason for my fall." The Hokage pointed to his younger brother and raised his right hand, saying, "B, if we win this war, I can give you that vacation you've always wanted. Just don't get out of our sights, your impulsiveness could very well damn us all." The Hokage then faced the door with his back to him. "Now let's get out there and we're going to give an ass-kicking like we've never done before, as the strongest nation there is." Infuriated by his words, the Hokage skipped opening the door and instead charged through it like a raging bull, smashing and scattering splinters across the corridor outside. B got up, shrugging, and started walking toward the location where his brother was going. Darui just sighed as he took out a little piece of paper and started making notes. With another sigh, Darui set the note down on the Hokage's desk and turned to leave. It was really unnecessary to give morale to a courier mission to Konoha. Konoha. Tsunade believed that the intelligence reports that had begun to arrive this morning were exactly as expected. As Shikaku said, Akatsuki was sponsored by the majority of the smaller nations. The sudden proposals of inter-country marriages from the various daimyos ruling their respective nations became evident. A month or so ago, a number of minor allied nations from Suna, Iwa, and Kumo broke away from their respective treaties, obstructing trade routes and numerous common roads that connect the various villages. It was one of the factors contributing to the decline of itinerant merchants in Fire Country. It was either unsafe or extremely unlikely to cross many of the remaining trade routes. Following that, many of them clamored for local trade instead, bringing industry and trade to the villages in their respective countries and to their remaining allies. Suna and Iwa faced especially difficult times during this time. In light of this, it was becoming more and more difficult to keep supplies on hand while Konoha was completely destroyed following Pain's invasion. Though 30% of the village was now operational, the reconstruction was halted, and Konoha was gradually beginning to rebuild from the most catastrophic attack since the invasion 3 years prior. It undoubtedly crippled them, but because of wise alliances with its neighbors, trade and industry were moving fairly well internationally, so the impact of embargoes from the more wary nations was lessened by that situation. After that, Tsunade was relieved that her workload had at least decreased by half for the time being. The only things left for her to sign were letters of authorization for the village's reconstruction and supplies for resuming the shinobi wartime program. All shinobi on the active roster were required to undergo rigorous training for at least 2 months in order to master an offensive type of jutsu and to at least be familiar with one healing jutsu and basic life support. Tsunade smiled at this. After all these years, Sarutobi had finally approved her proposal. Tsunade finally smiled in relief at that one item. She felt that at least their ninja were better prepared now since the invasion 3 years prior served as a warning. More prepared and more likely to survive than they did previously. Tsunade rubbed her irritated temples as soon as she flopped back from her chair to take a break from the headaches caused by paperwork and her successor's ridiculous inclinations to resign from his position, even if for good reasons. She leaned back in her chair and cried, "Retired godam my ass, I swear that Brad just wants to make me suffer from this insufferable amount of work." She had been relaxing, though, when someone barged through the door. As the aforementioned woman turned around in shock, Shizune yelled at the top of her lungs, "Godem Sama. Takigakure has just been invaded by Kusagakure." Tsunade pushed herself away from her desk, got up, and yelled, startled by the sentence her apprentice had left. Her eyes widened in shock. "What? When did this happen?" "Reports ushered in this morning. We don't exactly know the details of how many shinobi were sent by Kusagakure, but it could border to about 1,000 troops deployed." After that, Tsunade clenched her hands into fists. A distinct popping sound was heard as the Godem yelled with rage, "Send scouts and check the border for any signs of hostile units and monitor the situation. Secure the areas to our allied neighboring countries, particularly Wave. I don't want those bastards cutting off trade routes from any of the remaining allied countries that we have." With a salute, Shizune bounded out of her office. Tsunade leaned back in her chair, brooding. Tsunade was on the verge of giving in to the temptation to allow Konoha's attack to force her to act, but she knew that she could not act until the Supreme Commander, who has the authority to command all the forces from 6 villages, gave her the order. She would damage the reputation of both the commander and Konoha as a whole if she took action right away. If the Kages took independent action, the rest would be forced to follow suit, bringing chaos to Godekoku. Her heart began to race, and she could feel the tense atmosphere dissipating through the air. She could actually feel the anxiety that she had experienced years before, an anxiety she never imagined she would experience again. The tenuous calm that had held this continent together for the previous 20 years or so was ready to collapse once more. The war was just getting started. Iwa. The feared Iwa leader Ryutenbi no Onoki advanced ahead of his men, evaluating them as if he were a constant watchdog. His brows were almost in line as he leaned in closer to the men who were standing erect. Onoki could have been concerned about the alliance's risk when he learned that Earth countries' remaining allies had imposed a massive embargo on it and that there was an unexpected arms race going on. He likely objected to it for this reason. Instead of exchanging information directly with the remaining villages, why not? It would have continued to function in the same way without running the risk of global political and economic collapse. This type of calamity has now occurred as a result of the fear and bigotry that pervaded every human being. Onoki shook his head. The only reason they wanted to form the alliance in the first place was that none of their former minor allies would believe it. Onoki muttered under his breath, "Fools." The lot of them, but his observation escaped the notice of Akazuki, one of his guards. "What are you talking about, old man?" He only glanced at her and said, "I meant that those people that had put their trust in Akatsuki, supporting that madman's ideals, goals and ambitions. I cannot fathom as to what kind of lies did that man sputter out to the minor countries for them to act like this. What about you, Kuretsuchi? How do you see this war?" With a simple bow of her head, Kuretsuchi questioned, "Why are you asking me this, old man?" Onoki responded, "Humor this old man, would you?" and started to slowly ascend the stairs that led to his office. As his female guard continued, Kuretsuchi said, I think it's pointless. Onoki simply stopped at that statement. I think all war is pointless. There's no sense of victory when everything is over. You said back then, old man, that no nation benefits in war. There is no definitive gain in battle but terrible losses on all sides. In the end, winning is but a hollow thing. I taught you well, Kuretsuchi. You may become my successor yet. Onoki grinned and spoke to her. Don't be such a prude and just give me my title, old man, Kuretsuchi grinned. Kuretsuchi looked at the elderly man who was averting his gaze from his subordinate, to which Onoki replied curtly, no. There are still many things that I must do for this world, many more things that I must atone for. I regret the fact that we were the first to use the Jinchuriki program. I regret the fact that I neglected Han and left Rushi alone. Perhaps, on the road as being Tsuchikage, I lost myself on the way. Before my time ends, I wish to atone for all of the mistakes I've made. Regrets are the last thing I want on my grave. The Tsuchikage then walked up to discover an excruciating stabbing. Like pain on his hips. Oh, h. My hips. The feared leader of Iwagakure, Kurozuchi, sighed to himself. She helped the elderly man block out any protests from their cherished leader by shaking her head. However, she could never have denied her concern over the Alliance's bet on their supreme commander. At the very least, she hoped that this war wouldn't be drawn out and painful. Unidentified place. It was wet, foggy, and dark. Water droplets fell and reverberated in the cave's almost completely black interior. From within, faint wisps of chakra danced into the air and then vanished just as quickly. The black half of Zetsu remarked, eyeing the motionless form of Uchiha Sasuke, as the said avenger stood erect with hands clasped as if in prayer. Seek not penance for the wicked, walk the path of vengeance and you shall find that karma seeks retribution, none must stand in their way, even God. And should you encounter him on your journey, God shall be cut. The black half responded, What does that mean? To the white half's question. To walk the path of vengeance means to tread the path of blind hatred and destruction. A curse as to one what might say, that even the gods shall not ever seek redemption on his soul. When Sasuke opened his eyes at that moment, the Sharingan burst into life, its three tomo spinning erratically on its blood. Red iris, bending and reforming to form the six pointed star shape of the Mangekyo Sharingan, which for some reason had acquired the three crescents that surround the pupil like dark waves. Sasuke's left eye was bleeding profusely as he saw black flames shoot out of it, burning as hot as the sun. The flames that left Sasuke's vision faded, and the everlasting flames of Amaterasu slowly made their way to where Sasuke's vision was. Suppressing the black flames of the sun goddess, Sasuke closed his eyes. Tobi was impressed with his new puppet's development in less than 6 months. Uchiha Sasuke advanced at a never-before seen pace. His original 6-month plan for Sasuke was shortened to just 5 months, plus he received a new summon for bonus points. Granted, Sasuke would be more likely to do whatever he pleased given the drastic reduction in training time. Madara was unaware of how much Sasuke's drive meant to him, and he hadn't anticipated this. Turning to face Zetsu, Sasuke had said, My choices are my own. I'm not blind enough to kill people that don't stand against me. Those who wronged my family shall receive what is rightfully theirs. If they fear the power of the Uchiha this much, then I'll be their fear's incarnation. After saying this, Sasuke turned away from Madara and moved toward his sleeping quarters. I never expected the brat to be this fast in Rei. Acquainting himself with the Sharingan. He's even fully controlled Amaterasu again. Tobi nodded. But compared to Itachi, who had the ultimate genjutsu, Sasuke doesn't have the power to alter the perception of time with his Sharingan. Tobi went on to say, it is truly a great difference between the two, Sasuke, who has full control of the ultimate Kaden, and Itachi, who wields the most powerful genjutsu. No matter what, those two are like the sun and the moon. Zetsu's white half then asked, now that Sasuke has earned full control of that Mangekyo, he'll demand more coming from you, Madara. He's like a hungry lion in a den, he can't be tamed. That is probably one of my most disturbing concerns, Zetsu. I simply can't let Sasuke slip at the most crucial moment of these events, but I can't let his training drag on lest he wants to betray me. Powerful I may be, but I need Sasuke to further my plans and use Gedo Mazo to ascend. Your promise to me for a land, you still haven't forgotten, have you? Uttered Zetsu's black half. Under his mask, Toby laughed. Of course, Zetsu, you aren't being left out. Just remain alive after this war is over and you'll be receiving what is due to yours. His white half said, good. The only sound in the cave during their brief silence was the trickling of water, leaving each man alone with their own reflections. After a month, Naruto turned to face his mentors who had helped him over the previous 6 months. Fukasaku mentioned looking serious, Naruto, before you leave, I must warn you about something. That jutsu you created 1 month ago, I've seen you practice it. I advise that you don't use it unless you really are in a bad situation. The fourth was smart enough to leave behind notes and principles to his jutsu, however, compared to your version, it's basically impractical. I'm not one to break promises, Fukasaku. Sensei, so I won't tell you that I will not use it under any circumstance, was all Naruto said, grinning slightly. I just hope that you know the gravity of the price to be paid for that specific jutsu, Fukasaku said, shaking his head. Naruto grinned and gave a thumbs up at that. I don't plan on dying early, unless I find that answer, I'll still be here, even if it takes me an eternity. Naruto then disappeared in a puff of smoke. Eastern Sea, Lightning Country and Water Country boundaries. The nations that made up the landmass separating Lightning Country and Fire Country were members of the recently formed Federation. Since the usual routes from the various states were blocked off, courier missions to Water Country and then Fire Country had to be conducted by sea. The landmass near Water Country's sea created intercepting ships that patrol within its area of responsibility because the minor countries considered this as an act of defiance. In fact, if a small ship entered its seas, it would be completely destroyed before reaching Water Country. Even though Kumo was the strongest nation on the continent, his primary political strategy remained caution with a knife tucked under his sleeve just in case, meaning that the Raikage couldn't afford to take the initiative for fear of inciting retaliation from the other minor countries. Omoi watched with a worried expression on his face. The innumerable ships in front of him caused him to spit out a salivary gland. His right hand was clenched around his sword, a sign of his nervousness. In the pitch black night, the ships shook back and forth. Omoi couldn't help but sense that something was going to go wrong as the stars and reflection of the full moon shimmered on the water. Suddenly, Omoi felt his fear turn to anxiety as he glanced to his right and saw another fleet approaching from the east. As he looked closer, he saw globes of tiny orange lights coming from each ship. Omoi felt as though he could cut the tension in the air surrounding their fleet and sense the resistance to his blade. At that moment, Omoi saw strips of orange wisps rising to the sky, originating from ships that extended as far as they could see. Wisps of what is now clearly fire rained down on the ship that Omoi and his team were currently riding, like meteors crashing to Earth, a barrage of flaming arrows beginning to pierce the ship. With a loud curse, Omoi started running inside to get his teammates and figure out how to stop those unholy objects from burning their ship's mast. Karui, Samui. Get up. It's an attack. The three ninjas were confronted by a blazing wall of fire that danced around them as the two females woke up in alarm and grabbed their gear before going outside. The ship's mechanics, sailors, were going crazy trying to extinguish the fire and get the injured out. Karui watched in silence as two men carried a dead crew member, one of the sailors shouting his friend's name while he was furious and on the verge of tears. How could they sneak up on us like this? What happened to our interceptors and lookouts? Exclaimed Samui. We need to suppress the fire and let this ship stay afloat. Now isn't the time to find out about our lookouts, Karui shot the brown girl in the eye. A massive explosion that shattered the lower part of the ship's bow and sent splinters flying in all directions happened as the team members started assisting the crew in extinguishing the flames. It dawned on Samui abruptly that that was the direction Karui had previously encountered. The oldest student of Killer Bee looked on in horrified dismay as she struck the deck, hearing cries from people inside the ship. She fought to stand up as the ringing in her ears kept getting worse. At that moment, one of the sailors approached her, carrying a Karui that was slightly burned but still breathing. Subsequently, Omoi leapt down in their direction, embracing Samui and placing her arm across his shoulders. The ship is tilting downwards. We need to get away now, Samui. Karui, carry her instead of me, I'm still conscious, I can get up on my own in a minute. We don't have time for that, Samui. The ship's bow is taking a huge amount of water. I can carry you both instead. At that moment, the ship's main cabin started to ring with the sound of a bell. The first mate yelled, "The Taiko has ordered to abandon ship." Following the announcement of that statement, Dozens of sailors dove into the chilly ocean below, leaving the ship standing diagonally with the bow submerged below and the rudder at its highest point. Omoi slammed Karui onto her back and yelled, "Damn those Federation bastards, attacking an unarmed cargo vessel, merciless cowards." Samui grabbed onto her teammate's shoulder as he stood on the water's surface. Samui muttered under her breath as she looked ahead, "Damn it, and in the middle of the sea. The others won't be able to pick us up fast like this." Jumping down, shinobi charging from their respective vessels ran in the direction of their enemy vessels. Samui was also standing on the water's surface, still recuperating from the explosion's impact. "We'll need to get these sailors to safety first. Omoi, carry Karui to one of the ships, make sure that ship is away from the battlefield and is out of range, preferably, one that will reach water country faster. Then come back here and help me carry as much as possible." Omoi gave a nod and stood up. Asking his team leader, Samui, "What do you think could have caused this kind of attack?" He turned to face them. Samui nodded her head. "It could be anything, either as a statement of defiance or simply wrong navigation. Either way, we need to get these people out of here. Now go." Omoi nodded and sprinted to the closest ship he could find. After climbing aboard, he went to the captain's deck and, after placing Karui on the closest wall, he broke into the cabin and uttered the words, "Turn this ship back. There are men overboard just from the north." When the captain turned, his gray shiakusho over fishnet armor, brown pants tucked in, a green sash acting as the belt, and a dado nestled on his right hip revealed his advanced age. Wrinkles appeared on his cheek and forehead, and long white hair reached his shoulders. "I can't do that, son." Omoi froze for a second, gritting his teeth in fear of witnessing the men who had saved them earlier perish in the icy sea. Eventually, he found the strength to speak again. "What do you mean you can't do it? Are you going to let them die like this?" "Son, I can't risk rescuing a crew in the middle of an ambush. Believe me, I want to save them as well, I want to help them. But I don't want to put my men in danger and risk this ship of sinking as well. Ambushes are pretty much unpredictable. There could be ships that we think are on our side and then suddenly, they invade this one like flies to a carcass. If you want to save them, fine. But I'm going to leave it to your hands. People die in wars, it's the rule of battle, you're a shinobi, you should know about this stuff from the get-go." Omoi furrowed his brows and fixed the captain with a silent, indignant stare. He turned around, his fists clenched. As he ran down and leapt into the water, Omoi said, "And you should know that we don't play by the rules." His feet touched the surface but he didn't go any deeper. "I'm going to save them, whether you like it or not." Omoi then bolted for the location where the ship had last sunk. Konoha. Hearing rumors of an invasion, a war, and small countries passing by, Naruto immediately made a beeline for his office as soon as he returned to Konoha. He could feel the fear leaving his chest. It was terrifying, as though the atmosphere itself was so thick with anxiety and fear that it could potentially choke a man. Tsunade happily handed over control to Naruto as soon as he arrived at his office, briefing him on the current state of affairs. Gazing at the piles of documents, Naruto started to go through each one, scowling and swearing uncontrollably as he went through each and every mission report, surveillance report, and crappy incident that had happened over the previous 6 months. To his complete surprise and incredulity, the minor nations had started to show their mistrust and terror of the major powers by signing a treaty for an organization that openly opposed the alliance. Naruto was cursing under his breath, the whole thing leaving a bad taste in his mouth, and his return did little to ease his discomfort. They were aware that even the strongest warrior can be overcome by many, which made them realize how uncertain their leader really was when Tobirama offered to stay behind and divert a large group of shinobi. What if everything proceeded in the same way once more? Who is going to lead them? Who is going to be their leader? Men and women alike regarded their adored leaders with caution and concern. After all, no ordinary human was able to defeat the Yondaime, Namikaze Minato, who was regarded as the greatest ninja of this era and appeared to be unkillable. He stumbled into the menacing Kyuubi's paws. The idea had alarmed them since, in the event that Minato perished in combat, Naruto and Tsunade would be even more vulnerable to such a tragedy. Naruto exclaimed, grasping his forehead with his right hand and rubbing his temples, "I don't believe this." Tsunade said, sitting on the couch next to the desk, "We discussed over this 6 months ago, so you shouldn't be surprised." Naruto leaned back in his chair and replied, "I know. It's just that I can't believe that what Shikaku mentioned turned out to be true." As Tsunade opened a bottle of sake that had been delivered earlier, she remarked, "Well, you should." People listen to their fears, their anger, and hate. It's the most exploitable and destructive emotion a human can ever have. Sometimes, even talks aren't enough. After taking a small sip, she looked to the 4 photos framed on the upper wall below the door leading to the hallway. Fear breeds hatred, hatred breeds spite, and spite breeds wrath. I've learned that from the pervert and from my grandfather. Perhaps Jiraiya had the sentiment of being human out of the 3 Sannin. He was chauvinistic, but he had a deep understanding of being alive. Mercy was his biggest downfall, but mercy well placed. When Tsunade closed her eyes, a black pitch of darkness revealed the image of a young Jiraiya. "Hey. You can write me a love letter later. My name is Jiraiya." Tsunade smiled, too, and Naruto smiled back. As Naruto said, Tsunade grinned and said, "If he were alive right now, he would be so happy that you were thinking about him. I wonder why you didn't seem to see him that way." Naruto chuckled and Tsunade said, grinning, "That's because friends usually don't." Jiraiya even realized it somewhere down the line. Besides, what kind of woman would want an open skirt chaser? Tsunade arched an eyebrow at her successor. Subuto replied, "Well, I can't blame him for being like that. Being dumped over and over again could do that to a guy." Tsunade smirked and gestured to the Rokudame, saying, "I thought it was the exact opposite. Then again, Jiraiya wasn't exactly the norm. You on the other hand, are different yet, not of the norm as well." "What?" Naruto asked, observing naively. "I heard from Sakura about what happened with the Mizukage. She seemed overly forward with you." "What exactly did Sakura tell you?" "I mean, aside from the constant flirting she's giving me, which I'm pretty sure is just an infatuation, there was only political business with the whole event on the summit. Well, aside from the whole interruptions that occurred." Naruto widened his gaze on his predecessor. "Oh, so that's what they're calling it these days, is it? Political business?" With a slow blink, Naruto noticed Tsunade's tirade and raised an eyebrow. Naruto asked, and you're suspecting me of being into older women?" Naruto paled and abruptly turned various shades of red. "Oh, I'm not implying anything. It might be that the Mizukage just likes younger boys. What was it that Jiraiya said again? A Shotokan?" she said with an ear smile. Tsunade erupted in laughter as Naruto struck back, saying, "Oh, fuck you, Chan. You know it's only business and that's the way it's going to be. I've got a village to run." "Damn it, Naruto, I never knew you were this fun to tease." Naruto snarled in response. His brows were now getting closer together, and Tsunade raised his guard as a result of a sudden barge from the door. "Hokage. Sama. Danzo has escaped." It was time to implement this plan, Naruto thought with an inward smirk. Former Wood Country, Southern Border, Earth Country. Standing on the grassy plains just outside the Wood Country village, Madara peered around but saw no patrols in the area. When Madara realized Zetsu was out of the picture, his visible eye twisted, revealing a smile beneath his mask. "It's time, Zetsu, stand back. I think it's time to show the minor countries the toys that I'm allowing them to use." After that, Madara formed his chakra and clasped his hands together in a hand seal. Wisps of blue energy swirled around him, creating an updraft force. Then he slashed his right thumb, drawing blood, and took hold of a single kunai. Madara hit the floor with his hands, causing the summoning circles to extend to the floor as he went for the 5 hand seals needed to execute Kachiyose no Jutsu. A grotesque creature with 9 eyes, its head pointing upward, and its hands cupped together at the base of the palm emerged in a massive cloud of smoke, growling menacingly and opening its mouth. It released acrid white smoke that danced in the wind and shot into the air. Madara said, "I don't need Geto Mazo to sync with a person when I go out and release a Biju for a limited time. That's more of a sealing purpose for the Hachibi and Kyuubi. Sasuke won't be satisfied until he completes his quest, but it doesn't mean that I have to postpone my plans any longer than I should have. It's a shame I couldn't fully bring him to our side and had to go look for the elders, but that is neither here nor there anymore. Eventually, Naruto and Sasuke would clash and eventually, the result shall be the same, me ascending to my rightful place as the Jinchuriki of the Jubi." Then Madara said, reaching out to the monster's right palm as if it were petrified. Madara nodded, 4 tails would do nicely. Almost immediately, the menacing chakra of the tailed beast of Madara's choosing started to take on a physical form, and the monster started to growl and make a sound akin to regurgitating. The giant monkey with 4 tails vanished into thin air, snarling all around. With a flare of his eternal Mangekyo, Madara hoped into its forehead. The beast started to wildly trash around as it growled and eventually roared, letting out an ear-piercing screech. Madara's chakra alone was enough to calm it down. Then the old man leapt over to its head and stood there holding the ram seal between his hands. "I need to do as much damage as I can, but I only have 10 minutes before this wears me down," Madara muttered to himself as the 4-tailed beast's eyes glowed with an unsettling red streak. As the monster tilted its head upward and finally erupted in lava, chakra started to condense from it. The ground was devastated by the molten rock trail, which quickly burned trees and ignited everything in its path. The aforementioned tailed beast squatted down and growled at the little village below, letting out another screech. Like a rabid dog, it dashed toward the village, ready to wreak havoc. With a solemn thought, Madara watched as flames started to light up the village below. It would be raining blood today. Alongside Taka, Suigetsu appeared to be prepared to pass out due to the extreme heat and humidity. Given that Suigetsu is primarily composed of water, they weren't particularly amused by the fact that they had to travel to tropical regions of the globe to find 2 elderly people. It did not help that he was hefting Kabikari Hucho. The birds say that 2 aged people were seen just to the south of here, a small town, probably there to restock and resupply. While Suigetsu felt compelled to take one of his many water bottles and decided to drink, Sasuke simply carried on with his stroll. Suigetsu said, taking another gulp from his water bottle, "Damned heat, damned humidity, I can't seriously think of anything productive under this weather." Karen was about to say, "Stop your damn complaining, you Kappa. It's far too early for your whining, if it weren't for Sasuke I would've." When she felt someone else approach them, Karen sensed the man's hatred radiating from him. It came in waves and combined with a sensation she had never experienced before. Madness. The voice exclaimed, "I see that we meet again, Sasuke." Kun. As the man leapt to a rock and covered his face. His dark chuckle soon turned into full-blown laughter. Upon glancing at the enigmatic figure, Sasuke identified the voice. With a broad smile on his face, Sasuke said, "Kabuto." His irises, which had a slit for a pupil, were now gold, and the skin on his cheeks was peeling away. The man said, "Right you are, Sasuke." Kun, leaning forward and giving the stoic Uchiha a direct look. Sasuke asked, "What are you doing here?" "Oh, I was just trying to find you. I never knew how hard it was to track down Akatsuki members." Sasuke stated, "Taka is not part of Akatsuki, nor will we ever be." Kabuto, however, appeared to disagree. Kabuto sneered this time, his body slithering down the rock like a snake. "Oh? Rumors say another thing. But enough about that, let me tell you what I want from you." When Kabuto said, "I came here to take my revenge on you for killing Orochimaru Sama," Sasuke pulled his blade out of its scabbard and uttered those words. "Interesting, let me see if your hatred surpasses mine." The 2 behind the big man nodded as Jugo said, "Suigetsu, Karen, let's step back." Sasuke's blade screeched loudly from the discharge of electricity, crackling like lightning. Sasuke ordered, "Go, wretched snake," slicing the adjutant of the dead snake Sanin with his Chidori Iso, 1,000 birds chirping long sword. As clouds of dust emerged from the rock that had split apart from Sasuke's Chidori Iso, lightning crackled loudly in the humid areas of the area. With a maniacal laugh, Kabuto slithered around, flashing that unlikely smile while his hands radiated chakra. But Sasuke's apathetic exterior appeared to stay the same. Only the Uchiha furrowed his right brow. He dodged that quickly. With a flick of his right hand, Kabuto quickly drew closer to Sasuke while maintaining that menacing grin. Kabuto then gave Sasuke a reverse chop to the torso, and Sasuke leaned back to observe in great detail as the chakra scalpel Kabuto used on him missed. Then Sasuke changed his sword's grip to a reverse grip, bringing the blade's tip down to rest on Kabuto's head. The youngest Uchiha was encircled by Kabuto, who twisted his body to the side and ensnared him like a coiling snake, severing his arms and legs, as Sasuke dropped the blade to impale the man's skull. With his hands now glowing with the chakra scalpel, Kabuto's maniacal smile didn't waver as he swung his arms from side to middle, forming a cross-chop on Sasuke's neck that went straight for his jugular veins and carotid arteries. Kabuto's chakra. Glow. Filled palms instantly sent shivers down Sasuke's spine as he struggled and his eyes widened. The struggle stopped instantly, and the three of them watched in silence as this man tore like paper through Sasuke's blood vessels. Instead of coughing, Sasuke released a small stream of blood from his mouth as his Kusanagi's grip relaxed and the sword's tip pierced the earth. Kabuto laughed as he went on, "I didn't know you were this easy to kill, Sasuke." "Kun. What are you talking about?" Kabuto turned his head to his right, his golden-slit eyes widening as he saw the Uchiha standing there unharmed, Kusanagi in his left hand, diagonally pointing to the ground, the tip dripping with blood. The medic Nin's elongated torso burst open, spewing life, giving fluid everywhere. Kabuto yelled, his smile turning into a grimace as he collapsed. "You placed me in a genjutsu. I never noticed you whip it out as well," Sasuke said, his right hand crackling with electricity. "The moment you stared into my eyes, I already placed you in a genjutsu as a precautionary measure. It looked like I was right in you showing your hostility towards me." The sound of 1,000 birds chirping reverberated throughout the space, sparks flying in all directions. Sasuke spoke in a monotone, with his right hand silently retracted, applying the technique directly to Kabuto's chest. "Chidori." Chirping of 1,000 birds. Kabuto let out a howl of agony, his senses taken over by the overwhelming sensation of electrocution as Sasuke's pain left him numb. Kabuto watched in disbelief as Sasuke's hand emerged from the center of his chest. After removing his blood-covered arm, Sasuke turned off his Sharingan. Sasuke heard the presumed corpse chuckle as he started to leave, not even taking a third step. Turning around, Sasuke saw that Kabuto's chest was now covered in hundreds of white snakes as it started to reform, sealing the hole and mending it completely. "Don't you remember the power of the white snake, Sasuke? Kun, along with my ability as well?" Kabuto took a moment to rise. Now that his chest was completely healed, the ripped fabric revealed evidence of the brand. New skin. Kabuto looked at Sasuke with that same smile once more. "This regenerative power, along with my ability to infuse every cell in my body with chakra, has given me a regeneration rate that is on par with Tsunade. Sama's ability to regenerate lost cells." The medic's right forearm was now covered in scales as he raised it, casting a fleeting glow. Now, as it started to break down and reveal another set of scales, Kabuto's cheeks started to chafe. "Though, the longer I use chakra, the more potent Orochimaru Sama's cells become. Just standing here while doing the regeneration technique with my chakra is driving me to the brink of insanity," she exclaimed. Kabuto yelled, "Though with this technique and this wondrous power, I can never die in battle." As his body began to melt and transform into a swarm of snakes. Sasuke reacted quickly, leaping to the top of the tallest rock to survey his surroundings, gain a higher position, and restrict Kabuto's freedom of movement. At that moment, 4 enormous snakes emerged from the earth, widening their mouths in an attempt to engulf Sasuke. Kiri. Out of the 20 boats that Lightning Country sent out in a convoy, only 5 have survived the ambush that took place 3 days ago in the northern waters of Waters Country. Only 3 of the 20 boats, of which 15 messengers were tasked with reaching Water Country and the other Fire Country allies, were able to escape the fighting unscathed. Ao couldn't help but feel sorry for the 3 Cloud Shinobi, Samui, Darui, and Omoi, who had survived the terrible ordeal, judging by their solemn expressions. Though Kumo and Kiri had far fewer skirmishes than did Earth, Wind, and Fire, it had been more than 10 years since the last violent war. As a former combatant, he could only envision the atrocities committed on the battlefield. It was extremely horrifying to witness men slitting each other's throats and to smell burning flesh while screaming in agony. "Get them to the infirmary first, these 3 need medical attention, it looks like chakra exhaustion based from the symptoms, tell the Mizukage that the messengers will be delayed." The 2 escorts that had advanced toward the Mizukage's office after Ao had saluted them. Ao could only look up at the pure blue sky, which seemed to be mocking everyone on Earth. Ao checked the meager supplies Kumo had sent over for assistance, then heaved a deep breath and turned back to the Mizukage's office, knowing that she wouldn't be too pleased with the situation. What the hell is the real Supreme Commander doing in this situation, one wondered. Considering that 2 of the 7 swordsmen of the Mist Swords are now missing, he pondered whether Kiri would still be feeling strong when they started this protracted campaign. He had hoped so because Ao could not even begin to imagine the fallout from a madman's foolishness if they failed. Earth Nation. The sudden appearance of the Yonbi no Saru, four-tailed monkey, over a village in the once wooded region was like hell on earth. Smoke rose from the flames the tailed beast spewed from its mouth, and screams of anguish and death littered the black-stained sky. People started crying in fear and despair, and blood began to spill everywhere. Before more casualties would occur, the patrolling ninja unit from Iwa was compelled to act and attempt to evacuate the civilians while also stalling the Biju. One Iwa shinobi watched in horror as the four-tailed beast continued its rampage. Back then, he had heard about Han's burden as well as Rushi's. To put it mildly, he was frightened that the man he had known to be strong was attracted to and called by the monster that was tearing through the village. This one was far more terrifying than the one that was evoked by simply being in the man's presence. If nothing else, Rushi had received the respect he deserved from Akazuki. He had done Iwa a great service. He had dedicated his life to it, driven him to take on the most difficult tasks, and chosen to ignore his fears and Iwa's persistent rejection. He breathed his missions. He lived them. Despite his immense talent, skill, and success, Rushi believed he would never be able to achieve his goals. One day, he retired and disappeared without a word. His depressing seclusion and eventual loneliness persisted. It followed him around no matter where he went, and he never gave it a second thought. It was tragic. It was impossible for Akazuki not to notice the inner sadness and rage that Rushi had never shown when he saw the monster that now stood before him. Watching the horror that was happening right in front of his eyes caused a few drops of tears to fall from his eyes. Rushi's soul never did receive the peace it deserved, not even in death. The hideous creature devastated the planet, setting fire to people's homes, means of subsistence, and even babies. Everything appeared excessively harsh, savage, and unhumane. He became aware of the depth of human depravity when Akatsuki mentioned that they now possessed the Biju. He muttered, his voice trembling until it nearly stopped. My God, was this what Rushi Senpai had been holding inside of him the entire time? Shuddered Akazuki, telling the civilians to flee as quickly as they could. He was startled out of his deep fear by his squad mates' voices and the static in his ears. Akazuki. Taiko, we've cleared our station. We're going to the rendezvous point at the northern sector. Please finish here, holy shit. It's coming your way, Taiko. Double time your evacuation efforts and get out of there, now. As the creature with four tails wailed at him, Akazuki turned to face his side. With his enormous strength, the giant had deflected a slamming fist that was headed right for him. He used both arms to block the blow, but when he was distracted, he took a punch instead. From his position, Akazuki was propelled skyward, crashing through a house, through a grove of trees, and finally hitting the ground hundreds of meters away. Akazuki. Taiko. Akazuki. Taiko. Come in. Please, respond. That constituted the final sound he heard before vanishing into the depths of unconsciousness. Sasuke vs. Kabuto. Chidori Nagashi, chirping of 1,000 birds current. Sasuke's body erupted in a flash of lightning, causing the four enormous snakes to experience muscle contractions and collapse to the ground. As Kabuto was about to grab Sasuke by the ankle, he materialized beneath the rock that Sasuke was standing on, his hands glowing blue with chakra. Sasuke flexed his lower extremities and performed a backward somersault, barely missing. His right hand suddenly became numb as he prepared to use a fire jutsu and clasp his hands together for a seal. Sasuke grimaced in pain as he clasped it with his left hand, surprising himself. He rolled away from Kabuto as he slowly got back up after landing on the hard ground on his back. Kabuto grinned viciously and cackled, so the poison has finally kicked in, huh? Kabuto slowly raised his hands to his side while holding a set of shuriken in the interlacing of his fingers. When you hit me straight on with that Chidori of yours, it had allowed me to exert some of the poison caused by the white snake to fester on your skin, mixed with my blood. I've created an anesthetic effect on your arm through droplet to skin contact. Kabuto approached Sasuke slowly before unfurling it directly at the Uchiha, saying, though still not as potent as Orochimaru. Samas have created a desired effect that is surely to affect you if I manage to touch you with my blood on your chest. A few shuriken were thrown at Sasuke, and he deflected them by holding his kusanagi with his left arm while they whizzed past too close to his neck. Kabuto leaned forward, smiling and dangling his tongue. Now, you can't use any close-range jutsu, in fact, you can't use jutsu period. This makes your struggle all the more satisfying. His hands glowed blue chakra once more. Kabuto's growth rate increased instantly as the skin on his arms began to peel off and be replaced by scales. With an even bigger smile, Kabuto started laughing and held out his left arm, about to press his palm against Sasuke's chest. Taken aback by Kabuto's abrupt burst of movement, the Uchiha veered to his left, striking the side of his chest. Sasuke felt as though the muscles around his diaphragm had been severed, and he coughed up blood. He started to breathe heavily and felt lightheaded, and then he kicked Kabuto squarely in the chest, sending the insane man flying backwards. Dust clouds had erupted as Kabuto crashed onto the ground after hitting his back on a tree and passing through it. Sasuke then heaved, cradling his left side to where Kabuto had struck, saying, "You're mistaken. Kabuto. I have one jutsu that could effectively kill you. Without worrying about getting close to you. And finishing you off." Both dull and severe, the pain caused his muscles to twitch as his Sharingan switched to his Mangekyo Sharingan's gift. Amaterasu. Illuminating heaven. As the dust cloud started to engulf everything in Sasuke's field of vision, black flames flared around it. He heard Kabuto's screams coming from the smoke as the fire ate away at every fiber in his body. The fire raged forth, burning everything it stood on. Sasuke stood up, his legs shaking from the pain in his chest, and his forced breathing caused him to stagger a little before kneeling. His horrifying agony could be heard throughout the forest as the flames started to spread. "Did you think you've won?" As soon as Sasuke saw Kabuto, his eyes widened in shock. Half of Kabuto's shirt was burnt, and Kabuto was leaning on the side with his right arm resting on Sasuke's back. That special Kawarimi that Orochimaru Sama created. I knew it as well. I wasn't his right-hand man for nothing, Sasuke-kun. When Sasuke growled at Kabuto and swung his left hand back at the medic ninja, Kabuto only managed to catch it with his free arm and give Sasuke a menacing smile while flashing his slowly erupting fangs. "Nay, Sasuke-kun, I just want you to know that I've got a new poison I've been dying to try. Won't you give the pleasure of being my first subject?" As Jugo readied his half transformation, Suigetsu swiftly reached up towards Sasuke's allies and plucked the repaired Kabikari Hucho off his back. Suigetsu exclaimed, "This is bad. Jugo." As they both leapt to descend towards Sasuke, but not before swarms of shinobi emerged from the earth to block their path. Sasuke was being used as a bar table when Kabuto simply lifted and slowly waved his index finger, saying, I can't let you two bother me with this experiment of mine." Then, Kabuto exposed his teeth and sank them deeply into Sasuke's arm. As he released the poison that was dripping from his blood towards the Uchiha boy, who was grunting in pain, Kabuto laughed to himself. After finishing that, Kabuto gave Sasuke a sly grin and kicked him in the back, causing the boy to fall away. "That little poison just now, I created it specifically for you, Sasuke-kun. It's basically a poison that activates your cells to multiply rapidly, radically altering the meiotic reproduction of them. You know, in other words, Sasuke-kun?" Kabuto laughed wildly this time. "A tumor will grow on one part of your body, to where and when, I don't know. But it will slowly eat away your life as time passes by. You should just shut up, Kabuto." Sasuke snapped, gritting his teeth, his Amaterasu striking Kabuto's face hard, and his Mangekyo Sharingan igniting once more. Kabuto cried out in agony as the dark flames started to consume him completely. He screamed and cursed in anguish as he thrashed around like a headless chicken. He tossed and turned as he fell to the ground, his horrified scream growing louder. And then, after a long cry, went silent. With a sense of certainty that he had killed the insane man this time, Sasuke stood up slowly. Only to discover that Kabuto, whose entire body was singed by the black flames and kept regenerating even as the black fire consumed him, had abruptly burst from the flames. Ha-ha-ha-ha-ha-ha-ha-ha-ha-ha. Kabuto yelled incoherently as he dove straight at Sasuke and struck him in the face with a strong clothesline arm. The rock beneath the Uchiha was shattered as he fell to the hard ground, unable to avoid the sudden force of the attack. Ha 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 ha. Kabuto continued to laugh while stumbling over his words as he ran straight toward Sasuke, yelling only one word this time. Die. Die, 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 die. At last, Sasuke witnessed Kabuto release his final hold on reality. Sasuke just made himself stand up. He could only perform one more Mangekyo technique before eventually giving up from exhaustion. Sasuke took a deep, agonizing breath and his Mangekyo Sharingan flared to life again as he forced himself to stand, ignoring the pain. Susanoo. At that moment, a red glow emerged from beneath Sasuke, and the upper half of his body could be seen 20 feet above. Muscle then started to encircle the bone structure and skin, clothes, and its cloak and helmet covered Susanoo in armor resembling that of a Tengu. Then its left hand's shield grew larger, and its right hand split off to shoot forth a new one. With an uncontrollably grin on his face, Kabuto stood up and sprinted at Sasuke. Glancing around, Sasuke noticed the flames from Amaterasu's initial use on Kabuto on the side. Kabuto then leapt closer to Sasuke, causing his eye to twitch. Susanoo let out a war cry and diverted Kabuto to his left with its shield. Susanoo's shield expanded in a V shape like fluid lightning, and a tiny, nearly invisible string joined the two vectors of the inverted V. The giant swiftly positioned its fully formed chakra blade atop the shield. Turned crossbow and pointed it at Kabuto. When Kabuto hit the ground, the chakra of his previous lord had fully engulfed him. His consciousness had vanished, and he was now a mindless being. The insanity of this new person shook Kabuto's mind as it looked at the Susanoo and aimed its projectile directly at him. Disregarding reason and incapable of thinking clearly, Kabuto continued running directly in Sasuke's direction. Turn Aang. The arrow had veered off course and crashed squarely into Kabuto's abdomen, ripping him apart and carrying both of them into the sea of black flames that danced into the steamy summer sky. This person screamed in anguish and pain as he was now trapped by the arrow and the flames were eating away at his flesh while he yelled, cursed, and slowly attempted to extend his hand before being eventually dissolved and reduced to ash by Amaterasu's unending flames. The undead ninjas' corpses crumpled as their wielder was killed, and Jugo, Suigetsu, and Karen ran to Sasuke, who was panting and collapsed to the ground. Sasuke. Was that all the Uchiha heard? Before he was overcome by darkness and lost consciousness, he watched as Karen rolled up her sleeve and Jugo forced him to bite Karen's arm. Kirigakure. The Mizukage had awaited the medic's arrival with patience in order to tend to the three fatigued shinobi from Kumo. The sight of their unkempt and worn out appearances caused the Mizukage to call off the meeting. It also introduced the horrifying notion that, based on the naval forces of the various supporting nations, the Federation now possesses a formidable force. The Hokage has declined to take reprisal, despite Konoha's lack of response to Kusagakure's aggression toward Takigakure, which was clearly indicative of an approaching invasion force. Konoha was only increasing border patrol activity. Terumi Mei was getting impatient, even though the Hokage had not moved in the interim. She would not take this act lightly. Although the Hokage was young, passionate, attractive, and quite gentle, not to mention idealistic and a fool in his position, she had far more political experience. She refused to allow it to be the cause of this alliance's dissolution. Mei sighed and was finally greeted by a hospital employee, who then gave her permission to see the three Kumo messengers. She entered and sat gracefully on the only chair, her hands resting on her thighs. The three shinobi within tensed and said nothing as they attempted to sit, but Mei held up her hand and instructed them not to exert themselves. I've heard all of your encounters from Ao. I'm very sorry that you had to experience such horrifying events unfold. But I trust that all your hard work was meant for nothing. Looking down, Omoi recalls that horrific night and how their forces met complete defeat in the battle for the Western Sea. He could still clearly recall all those men who had been burned alive, shot with an arrow, or even drowned in the frigid waters. It was his first experience fighting in a war, and he couldn't help but feel sorry for all the veterans who carried their resentment into their final days. But as mortification set in and Karui realized how completely useless she was to the conflict, she gripped the sheet of her blanket. She was knocked out by a blast impact, so she was unable to assist Omoi and Samui. Even though she was shaken by what had happened, Samui forced herself to talk in her typical flat, businesslike tone. Reikage. Sama, Killer E, 2nd. In command of the Alliance, has proposed that the 5 cages establish a central command in Iron Country. He says that coordinating the forces would be easier. He proposes that a minimum of at least 200 soldiers be sent there to serve as the main force of the Alliance. From there, the 5 cages are to spread their forces to different lands of the Federation along with a wide manhunt for members of Akatsuki. In response, the Mizukage said, "Only 200 of my soldiers? It won't even be enough to at least dent an aggressive village like Kusa, who has gained a considerable amount of territory and resources from its neighboring country." It made sense that they would need to move quickly and that transferring a sizable army across borders would be impractical. It would be even more evident in an archipelagic nation like theirs, with ships being used for troop transportation and everything. Yes, the Hokage believes it is enough when your forces meet up with Konoha's. He believes that from there, the Supreme Commander would take command. How you shall reach Iron Country shall be decided by the Supreme Commander himself, since he shall obtain the main bulk of the forces. Replied Samui. The Mizukage gave their options some thought and then looked thoughtful again. It was now obvious that it would work because Fire Country and Water Country were actual neighbors. Mei turned away from the three Kumo Nin and said as she nodded and rose from her seat. Good job, all three of you. You deserve your rest. Thank you for giving me this kind of information. As requested, the army of Kiri shall be sailing east. She then carefully shut the wooden door leading to their room. Mei was nervous as she made her way to her office and prepared messengers to be sent to Konoha. 2 days later, Konoha. Naruto now addressed the populace while perched atop the Hokage tower. He was now delivering another speech, this time to his troops. Standing tall before their youngest leader to date were warriors Tsunade had trained and led for 6 months, warriors willing to fight for the cause of the leaf. After glancing around and nodding, Naruto started speaking. It's been 6 months, and we all know the signs of war have finally hit full circle this time. He glanced around, swaying as his soldiers remained perfectly poised. Tiger appears to be everywhere. Akatsuki has managed to anchor itself well onto the minds of the people who weren't supposed to be involved in our fight. It's hard for me to put a tough act here in front of you. As this war is going against everything that I've stood for, against everything that I've ever fought for. But in front of the Alliance, I was taught that even leaders have to make the most crucial of decisions that involve you all. At that moment, Izumo and Katetsu showed up carrying a big folded piece of paper. Naruto took advantage of a lone Kage Bunshin to take the paper from the two of them and unfolded it in front of his devoted soldiers. When the paper was opened, it revealed a map of the whole continent with a big X on the portion of land between Earth Country and Lightning Country. In a 5 days' worth of time, Water Country shall prepare and march their forces through Fire Country along with us, and we'll charge through River Country, effectively freeing Wind Country from the embargo. From there, we'll go straight north, to Iron Country, and from there, establish a central command. The Hokage, who formally represents as the head of the Alliance publicly, has proposed that Iron Country be considered our base of operations. That's why I'm prepared to take only 200 of our forces, as will the Mizukage. No doubt we'll probably face resistance when we reach River Country, and this is mostly a very dangerous campaign. Tsunade has done well in making sure all of you stand prepared in my absence, and I'm sorry for leaving on such short notice, but I needed to make sure that we at least stand a chance against the Federation and Akatsuki. You've all heard it by now. Akatsuki has 7 of the Biju. Some of the men twitched in response. They included survivors of the Kyuubi's 16-year rampage, and even though 10 years had passed since then, the sheer terror inflicted by the Biju remained ingrained in their memories. Then, Naruto lifted his hand to his face level and motioned for his men to let him finish. That's why I'm going with this mission, to make sure that we can prevent a Biju kill all our comrades and allies. I'm asking you now, are you prepared to fight for our cause? If you think you have the guts to take on such a dangerous operation, step forward. If you think not, then it's fine as well. I'm not forcing you, as I know some of you have families to take care of, wives, husbands, sons and daughters. You can protect our home. I'll only be taking 200 men. So step forward if you want to go with me. Everybody's clothes were tousled as the soft wind swirled around the top of the Hokage tower. There was silence outside. The tension was palpable as their leader stood atop the tower, his arms crossed, feet on the rails, and a grim expression on his face as if he was bracing himself for the worst. After a few moments with no movement from any of the Leaf Shinobi, Tsunade, who was standing behind Naruto, was ready to yell at their men about how cowardly and lack character they were when she noticed an extremely unlikely person approaching. Looking up at the blonde Hokage standing on the rail below, Shikamaru said, "I'm here to protect the king, but I can't do anything if I just stand around and watch our enemies do what they like. I'm volunteering, if for the sole fact that I don't want to drag this troublesome war to a longer time. If something can be done, then we just have to do it." With a relaxed expression on his face. As Izumo started writing Shikamaru's name on the notepad he had brought earlier, Naruto nodded. At that moment, Kakashi and Yamato, the next group of people, took their place in front. Yamato scratched his head as Kakashi spoke, his eyes fixed on his favorite book. Kakashi said as he turned a page. Like Shikamaru said, if something can be done, then we just have to do it. No point on just being on the defensive. And by dragging this war longer, we are playing right into Madara's hands. I won't let the legacy of the 4th Hokage and the very ideal of this village vanish like that. Nodded Yamato. I'm probably a necessary member due to my abilities. I'm limited to what I can do, but I'm sure it will be enough. At that moment, Guy leapt out of his position and took a frontal position. I, Maida Guy the beautiful green beast, refuse to let the cool and hip Kakashi to be on this mission without me. I refuse to be left behind. Lee had yelled as he too had leapt from his position. Yash. Then I shall endeavor as well, my sensei. I shall join you on your most perilous journey yet. Tenten trailed behind the master and student, yelling angrily, hey wait. The Hokage isn't finished yet. As they started to dash from the assembly. Lee, your youthful spirit never ceases to burn brightly. Come. Let us now run 500 laps around Konoha to celebrate our most youthful fire. Then Kiba and Akamaru moved forward as well, giggling along with everyone else at the antics of the imposter master and pupil. I can't let Shikamaru be the only one acting cool in our age group. Count me in, Hokage. Sama. They soon started moving forward one by one, taking a risk and risking their lives to defend the village they wanted to defend. The names of the men stepping up to volunteer for this mission were now beginning to pile up, and Kotetsu and Izumo were trying to keep up. Wait please. We need all of you form a single file. First come, first serve. Still, a few shinobi remained standing behind, and things only got worse. With his arms crossed, Naruto stood on the railing and addressed them from above. His words were direct but firm. Are you all sure about your decisions? This may be the last time that you would ever see your home again, are you all certain? On their own, it was a quiet but resounding yes. They knew it was possible and had a good chance of happening. Since then, the Federation has been sending out ninjas left and right, and with some small nations below in River Country just a neighbor to the east of Fire Country, things could get really bad. The blonde kept watching the people sprawling below, but as soon as it was finished, he raised his hand a little and Kotetsu instantly kneeled at his side. He then addressed the Chunin, saying, Kotetsu, I want you to get me Aburame Shino, I have an important mission for him. Kotetsu then bowed and proceeded to leave via Shunshin. Naruto kept a close eye on his village for the next 5 days, monitoring it like a hawk. He noticed that the volunteers were packing up everything they owned, and he even paid some of them a visit. Never once did he take off his hat as he entered their homes and spoke with their families. He still remembered one specific meeting he had with a student who was still enrolled in the academy. Hokage. Sama. A small child approached him, followed closely by his shinobi father. When Naruto saw the child, he gave him a respectful glance. Unable to resist, Naruto smiled a little. The boy exclaimed, wow. You're even cooler when you're so up close. Naruto smiled, which caused the youngster to smile back. The village chief was at the father's house, and although the father was a little miffed about it, he apologized to the Hokage and Naruto just shrugged it off. Then, kneeling in front of the youngster, Naruto asked, and what's your name, kid? While fixing his gaze on the boy. The child responded, Sir, Hideaki, sir. With a mock salute and a voice that sounded like that of a soldier. With a laugh, Naruto stroked the child's head. The boy in the blonde said, hold on there, little tiger, you're still not a ninja to be calling me sir like that. Wait until you're a genin. The child asked, are you really going to war? Naruto paused, looking shocked for a brief moment before returning with a depressing smile. Yeah, I'm afraid I'm going to have to. Because I have to be there for people like your dad, I have to fight. It's because we have to keep you kids safe from those men. And because I want to prevent another tragedy of the past. With pure curiosity, the young child peered over Naruto's head. When the blonde noticed that the boy had looked to where his hat was, she noticed that he had also looked up and had forgotten to wear it. She carefully took off the headgear. Naruto grinned and put the boy's hat on the Hokage's head. The child raised his head and used his hands to steady it until he could see the 6th Hokage's face. Hideaki grinned proudly as Naruto saluted, saying, looks good on you, Hideaki. Just you wait, Hokage. Sama, one day I'll become just like you. With an even bigger smile, Naruto ruffled the child's hair once more. I'd rather that you don't, kid. If you want to be a good man, then you're just going to have to find a path that suits you. After that, the boy returned the hat to Naruto with a hint of disappointment, but Naruto got up and took it. Turning to face the patriarch, Naruto remarked, "He's a good kid. Makes me wish that I shouldn't have taken this job in the first place." The patriarch asked, "Hokage Sama?" Naruto just shook his head. Naruto looked up and saw a shooting star streak across the chilly night sky. It's like what old man Sandaime was feeling. I wish I didn't have to do this. As he started to walk and wave at the father and son, Naruto said, "Then again, it's merely wishful thinking on my part. I can't back down now. Everyone is counting on me. Make sure to say your goodbyes, it's going to be one long mission." The father only gave a nod. After arriving at his office, Naruto started his final night of paperwork before leaving. His clones had already taken care of a few of them, and now the others were sorting and packing his gear into his scrolls. There were stacks of them. The blonde noticed that his office was disorganized, hard to follow, and messy, more like a functional room in a bank. With a sigh, the blonde took a seat behind the desk and leaned back slightly while the clone with the notepad started reminding him of the paperwork that still needed to be completed. After working for hours, he realized that it was only 10 minutes until midnight when he was finally done. Glancing around the restored areas of Konoha, he discovered that his office was the only place where lights were still on. The blonde, who had chased his clones away 2 hours earlier when he was just a few papers away, yawned. He stood up from his chair, stretched, and set his hat down on the desk with the fire symbol facing him. "No need to wear this if I'm on the battlefield, it's better if I leave it here," Naruto murmured. After leaving the hat on the Hokage's desk, Naruto slowly closed the door while the light from the fire symbol faded. Naruto made his way to the top of the office before returning home to relax and wait for Kiri's armies to arrive. That evening, Naruto looked up at the faces of the former Hokages carved into the mountain as a chilling night breeze blew through Konoha. He wasn't surprised that his face wasn't there 6 months after taking office because the village's repairs had taken precedence over their monuments. He was somewhat relieved because, unlike his forebears, he really didn't want his face to be permanently etched on the mountain in a frown. Instead, he thought it would be better if the Hokage grinned toothily at the gloomy monument. After all, it was his signature move. With a laugh, he put his hands in his pockets. That would look amazing, in some way. After all, he was anything but normal, and this was different from the usual. Naruto turned to face his village and noticed that, as a result of Pain's attack, Konoha's walls appeared a little higher than they should have been. Konoha was a massive crater, and it would probably take years for it to be repaired so that it would once again appear normal. This war added to that burden. For a split second, it actually made the blonde look depressed. Naruto thought to himself before he finally decided to jump down that Konoha could go on without him because, in the end, it was the people, not the Hokage, who created Konoha. Naruto glanced back at the Hokage's office once more on his way home before turning around and heading inside. "Naruto-kun?" Naruto looked surprised to see Hinata still awake at this hour and turned to face the Hyuga heiress, who had a worried expression all over her face. He recalled that, although the majority of the branch members registered along with a few main house members to demonstrate that the main house were not cowards, she was not registered with the force set to march to River Country. The elders had determined that she was the heiress after all, and she was now forced to stay in Konoha. Naruto mocked the haughty group of elderly men, assuming they had valid points. Hinata shook her head when Naruto reminded her, "Shouldn't you be resting, Hinata? You've got a lot of stuff to do tomorrow." The shy girl, still twiddling her fingers, said, I couldn't sleep," as she peered at the ground. When Naruto asked, "Oh, so that's why. Mind telling me why?" Hinata clenched her fists and strengthened her resolve. "I've had a bad feeling for a while now. I thought a night out would do me good," she said, glancing directly at the blonde. Just grinned. "Well, I've still got some time enough to kill, why don't we talk about it? There's a 24-hour shop that I know that sells some decent food." Not one to pass up an opportunity to spend time with her beloved, Hinata nodded rapidly. Naruto just grinned. After purchasing their food from the aforementioned store, Naruto and Hinata sat down on a park bench in the area. Naruto was staring at his ramen cup as steam filled his nose as Hinata unwrapped her sandwich and began to nibble slowly. Naruto suddenly raised his voice and said, "The last time I was here, I was a crying wreck when I found out that the pervert had died." As soon as Hinata saw that Naruto was referring to Jiraiya, the blonde leaned forward and rested his elbows on his knees. Naruto continued, slightly shaking the ramen cup. Seeing what he did, I kind of felt angry at Ero. Senin like that, running off to his own doom that he knew as well as Chan did. Naruto said as he opened the plastic cup to reveal the hot noodles inside, but now that I think about it, I kind of see why he did it. There was something he could do, and that he didn't miss the opportunity to do it. Naruto had suddenly felt that his ramen wasn't the greatest thing to have right now. He knew he was going to die, but he still did it. It was something that he wanted to do, simply because he wanted to protect me. Naruto grinned and turned to face Hinata. Now, I feel like I'm doing the same. I want to protect everyone, simply because I want to. Hinata couldn't help but smile wistfully. She merely said to Naruto, forgetting her sandwich with ease as a few tears fell from her eyes. She had the impression that she would never see Naruto again. Please, promise me Naruto-kun, that you'll live. That you'll come back here, to Konoha, to us. We don't want another leader give off a heroic death anymore, we just want him alive when he returns. Hinata stood up and gave Naruto a shoulder pat. Please, promise me, it's enough that you have to lose everything for everyone, don't lose your life as well. Don't talk about like you were going to die for us, it hurts so much just you saying it. This time, Naruto was stunned into silence as he came to a stop, dropped the ramen cup he was holding, and looked down. Her voice broke as she yelled at him, please keep your word that you'll live, don't break your promise. Hinata was still crying, and Naruto just offered a small, genuine smile. And he gave Hinata the biggest smile he could manage at the moment, saying in words that seemed to ease him. Thank you, Hinata. I promise, and I won't ever break it. It's my promise of a lifetime to you. He replied. And with that, while getting ready for his journey in the ensuing few hours, Naruto walked Hinata back to the manor of her residence. When the blonde got to his apartment, she got into his pajamas and went to bed, sleeping there until later in the morning. At 6 in the morning. Though he was still tired, Naruto had to slap his face to stay awake due to the growing tension while he and his allies waited for the Kiri-nin soldiers and the Mizukage at Konoha's southern gate. When the doors gradually opened and Naruto noticed that the Mizukage and her soldiers were now walking a good distance away, he gestured for his soldiers to march in front of the group and take the lead. When they were near enough, the Hokage gave her troops a formal greeting, saying, Likewise, Hokage. Dono. I'm sure that your village can offer us the necessary supplies before we part? Mizukage. Dono said with a polite smile. I'm relieved that you made it here in one piece, Mizukage. Dono. With a nod, Naruto held up his arm to indicate that the supply caravans should be given to the Kiri-nin, who had been heading towards Konoha for the previous 3 days. Naruto continued, the trek would be 3 days from now, from here to the eastern border, through there, we'll be marching on the north eastern side and strike from there, where we'll be meeting with the forces from Wind as we push up. We'll have to make a detour at Iwa first though. A Megacure still has not sworn allegiance to any side, but will most likely stay neutral until the outcome of this initial assault. Mei inquired, hasn't a Megacure sworn allegiance to the alliance already? Naruto shook his head. The Lady Cage nodded as Naruto explained, it's just because AIM is stuck between 2 opposing sides on each direction. If we can pull off a victory at River Country, they would likely join us. The Mizukage said, very well, then let's us march northeast, Hokage. Dono. It is time to show the rest of the world that we are not to be trifled with. Naruto just nodded and turned away, praying that this wouldn't turn into a bloodbath. He hoped that talking to their leader first would be beneficial. However, his former master's words reverberated in his ears just before he was ready to embark. Naruto, power drives a man insane. They drive people insane. You need look no farther than Gato, your first C rank mission, if you believe that leaders have such pure hearts. Greed feeds on itself and eventually consumes a person's soul. Brat, you'll get it when you meet a daimyo one day. You will witness the depraved state to which humans can degenerate. As night fell, all of the men standing watch over River Country's northeastern outpost became silent and appeared apprehensive and chilly. Everything was completely dark, the only sources of light being their lamps and the stars in the sky. They faintly heard crickets chirping a few meters from where they were stationed. The men stationed at the eastern front of the outposts were so paranoid about the darkness that they were always holding swords and kunais tightly. A soft whisper from the midnight wind extinguished the lamps and torches in each outpost for a little while. Death suddenly raised its ugly head at that point. Numerous shinobi emerged from the leaf cover, seizing the brief darkness as an opportunity to destroy this outpost before any of them could respond appropriately. They weaved through the quiet chaos, slitting necks and carrying out bloodless killing maneuvers left and right. Ninjas then swarmed throughout the makeshift outpost like scavengers on a carcass, effectively severing the eyes and ears of one of River Country's border stations. From inside the compound, Kiba, who had participated in the night raid, could hear the muffled screams of agony. For a split second, he appeared completely disturbed, and the smell of spilled blood covered his nose. Glancing to his left, he saw Yamato standing composedly, a hand resting on his elbow, commanding the small squadron to destroy the compound's structure in a methodical and efficient manner. He was tasked by Yamato to notify him if anyone needed to leave the outpost. Yamato thought back to what Shikamaru had said, outposts are the eyes and ears of any defending nation. They tell the signs of an impending invasion, take them out, and even a minor force can conquer a country. It is understandable why Konoha shinobi found the boy to be so valuable. He was a real strategic meeting pro. At that moment, Kiba's nose happened to catch a glimpse of someone, and he was able to escape the slaughterhouse, so to speak. With a sudden frown, Kiba turned to face Yamato, and the Junin nodded. Still fixated on the carnage that was currently occurring, Yamato ordered, "All right, Kiba, you take point. You'll be taking a team of 5 shinobi with you. I don't care who they are, as long as you intercept any escaping shinobi from this vicinity. Your limit distance is 3 kilometers. Move out." For some reason, standing on a thick tree branch while the assault was happening felt completely normal to him. Perhaps he was too accustomed to the Anbu, Yamato thought, that the idea of performing these dirty jobs was just something that happened every day back in the Black Ops days. Since Kiba had already taken 5 of his men, it's likely that they were starting their clean-up tasks, as the Anbu refers to them. Yamato turned to face his right in time to see Kakashi leap down to his right, stand erect, and tell his Kohai, "With this, the 5 main fortresses here in River Country should be easy enough to take down." I can't believe just how an obscure figure of legends past was able to gain the trust of the minor countries so easily, Kakashi said, and Yamato could only nod as the screams of bloody murder started to fade. As Kakashi shook his head, Yamato said, "It would seem like Madara had a card dealt under his sleeve when he tried to negotiate on the summit in exchange for the remaining tailed beasts. No, it was more like a hasty decision on the part of the minor countries, and they feared the power from the alliance. I wouldn't blame them though. Throughout the history of shinobi, the ones that suffered the most during war were the minor countries. Most of the fighting was done on grounds not of the 5 great nations. The result was countless minor countries either dissolved, or were absorbed into other countries. Then what do you think, Senpai? Who is in the wrong on this war?" Yamato asked, and Kakashi merely shook his head, as he answered, "It's tough to say. Yes, the minor countries were fooled so easily like that, but they had a reason to fear the alliance. What if someone in the near future uses the power of the alliance in order to absorb more minor countries and take away their liberties that they had back then? It's just one of the questions that go through the heads of each village's leader and each country's daimyo. No matter how you see it, the alliance is a force to be reckoned with. Yes, we were forced to create this alliance, but we had our reasons as well. We want to put a stop to Akatsuki, who now has 7 of the 9 Biju, if it continues. Virtually all life itself will be subjugated under Madara's will. We aren't really the ones to strike on the offensive here, since this Federation was the one that started the campaign to their side, but it seems we've been playing in right into his hands even if we now know his work throughout the past 10 years or so." In response, Yamato gave the Junin a look of complete astonishment as Kakashi continued, "You've realized it, haven't you, Yamato? The alliance is moving at a sluggish pace, because the leader is young. He's still trying to grasp on what is happening all around. Naruto is Hokage. Yes, he's the head of the alliance, yes. But to thrust a responsibility where he still can't get a grasp of is utterly impossible even for him. Instead, he focused the task on himself, to improve to a point where he can become a figure worth looking up to, a pillar of strength. That way, he can instead intimidate other countries to stand down and make it a point to listen to him and to give us battlefield morale when he finally enters the war zone. I don't understand, Senpai. How does Naruto's role and leadership abilities relate to Madara's schemes?" Yamato inquired. Kakashi, on the other hand, placed a hand on his chin and knelt down, gazing down at the shinobi below who were searching the area surrounding the now quiet outpost, clearing the bodies of both friends and foes. "I'm saying that Madara, who now has a firm grip on the Federation, is silently pulling the strings using one form of event to another from his side. He can tell what the Federation should do, and we'll counteract in order to stop them. and as the battle continues to drag, will more than likely fall to his hands. His pushing his plans in a pace that the alliance complies fast, and with these turn of events, it could very well lead to Madara winning. After a brief pause, Yamato felt a tingling sensation along his spine and a twinge of fear as memories of the long-ago Uchiha patriarch persisted in his mind. The younger Anbu captain hesitantly questioned his senpai. "Then, is this war a hopeless effort to begin with?" replied Kakashi, "Perhaps it is, perhaps it isn't. But with an elusive and cunning man like Madara, anything is possible." At that moment, Yamato came to understand the full extent of Madara's abilities. He had hidden himself, utilized Akatsuki to amass the Biju, and swayed every nation to work in his favor. How insignificant would it be for Madara to use this war as a tool to achieve his goals? Yamato looked worried and said, "Should we tell them about this, senpai?" Kakashi, though, shook his head. Mizukage might be able to overlook this as nothing more than a mistake on Naruto's part due to his new leadership role, but it won't be the same with Onoki or Killer A who have expressed their doubts earlier on, Kakashi said. Looking up at the night sky, the light of the stars clearly visible for the night, and he saw the rising smoke coming from the cremated bodies of the dead. By now, most of the cages may have realized this, which is why the other four are only waiting on the Supreme Commander's movements. If Naruto was the first to act, then the rest follow. It's his pivotal role. However, his inexperience and a part of his reluctance prevented him from doing that, something one of the other cages would frown at, especially the Tsuchikage. If the situation were different, Kakashi and Yamato would be extremely concerned, even terrified, as the smoke signaled a siege and might notify the other outposts in the nation. However, since the majority of the outposts had already been secured, their only remaining task was to move quickly before the fortresses became aware of their movements. Kakashi couldn't help but experience a tingling sensation of unease that, at best, might result in something terrible. He sensed that something sinister was about to occur. Now that every human being alive was engaged in battle, all he could hope for was guidance from his ancestors. River Village, Northern Region. The sky overhead was covered in gray clouds, and it was beginning to rain again. Meanwhile, Konoha's two elderly advisors were on the run. Mitokado Homura had believed that Sasuke, the last surviving Uchiha, would return to haunt them at some point. They would eventually face the consequences of their previous choices, much like a judge issuing a sentence. As an advisor to the former Hokages, Hiruzen and Tsunade, Homura believed in karmic retribution and knew that their downfall would stem from important decisions that were not left up for judgment. Yes, the massacre was horrible, but it was the last resort for neutralizing a guerrilla and averting a full-scale conflict. The Uchiha clan consisted of honorable men, and honorable men do not acquire their position by tact and compromise. Given the nature of men, it was a hard truth to deny and one from which they are unable to escape. Everything about the Uchiha factor was disorganized. The night of the Kyuubi attack was the beginning of the end for everything. The Uchiha considered the Senju's ability to control the Biju to be lost, and they forbade the Senju from ever using this technique in public. Then again, why did the Kyuubi target Konoha in particular? Was it to demonstrate that they had run out of ways to control the beasts? No, Homura considered every scenario, from the straightforward one in which a natural force had appeared out of nowhere to the more complex and planned one in which the other villages had obtained the Kyuubi and a Jinchuriki had been made to be sent on a suicide mission to Konoha. However, the list of deceased Uchiha members in the reports that were given to him and Kaharu bothered him that day. To put it simply, none existed. Homura furrowed his brow at this. He had previously questioned Kaharu, confronting her about it. Was this just a coincidence? No, it had to be something much more significant, something the Uchiha held grudges against. The Sandaime, who had been startled by this abrupt development and had requested more time, was approached by the elders when it appeared that they had solved the mystery. It's time to look into the situation more thoroughly, as this would provide the Uchiha with an explanation for their suspicions. Danzo, who had then proposed that Anbu patrols and monitors be sent to the Uchiha clan and that they be kept apart from the main villagers using a construction ruse, was aware of the situation. The Uchiha were offended that they had to be the ones evicted from their houses and placed in new ones because they had not been informed of this. But an outside watch was insufficient for the man hidden in the shadows. Danzo required a mole inside the complex to investigate any potential coup indications. At that moment, he came across Uchiha Itachi, a young prodigy who had lost his teammates and Junin instructor during the previous war. Back then, Itachi was a chunin who was quickly climbing the ANBU's ranks. On the day he was promoted, he had his spies keep a close eye on the gifted child and scrutinized Itachi's actions. It goes without saying that Itachi was the ideal person to keep an eye on the Uchiha clan from the inside, having by that point started to fervently adhere to the will of fire philosophy. The realization of their fear came just a few years later. The Uchiha clan, who were the other half of the founding members of Konoha, thought they had had enough of being left out of the political system and wanted a piece of the power that the Senju clan then held. This was a manifestation of their worst nightmare. Fortunately, Itachi, who was by that point a member of the elite Anbu squad, was selected as the mole against Konoha's top brass, a decision that thrilled the root chief. The Uchiha were kept in the dark about the Sandame's knowledge of what was going to happen through a series of deceptions upon deceptions. And the rest is history, as they say. Homura adjusted his glasses, got up, and filled his water bottle at a nearby stream. Then, he leaned down and knelt beside a clear, immaculate creek. It was then that he noticed a red streak that followed the path of the water. A great deal of horror leaked out of him as he turned to face the corpse of Kaharu, who had been beheaded and had blood trickling from her neck. Her lifeless body was lying by the small stream. It was not the time to lament the dead, so Homura stood up and readied himself to face whoever had defeated Kaharu. Even though he was aware of this, he couldn't help but feel sad for himself because he was the final member of Team 7 from Sarutobi Hiruzen's generation. Hearing rustles in the bushes, Homura reached up to pull a kunai from his sleeve, being cautious not to slay any enemies. Homura was suddenly pulled to a stop and had to look down to see a spear made of lightning piercing his chest from the back. The spear's tip was erupting sparks and the creature was chirping noisily, like 1,000 birds. The man, who was now dying, let go of some blood as he slowly turned to face Uchiha Sasuke, whose eyes were now flaring with life and transforming into a Mangekyo Sharingan. Homura sprang to his feet in a heap of blood, staring up at the gray clouds and a sly smile on Sasuke's face as Sasuke obnoxiously withdrew the lightning blade from his chest. "Burn in the depths of hell, you bastard, along with that old woman." Before he could shut his eyes for the last time, he saw lightning crackle across the sky, as though the heavens themselves were punishing him for his transgressions. However, before he could act, he noticed that the last Uchiha appeared to be paler than he had remembered. With a struggle, he raised his right hand and placed it on the blade, holding on tightly as his fingers bled. Knowing that his time was running out, Homura struck the blade closer. "This is what you wanted, right? I know what I did was wrong, but sometimes you need to tear your heart to achieve the greater good," he smiled and said to the young man who had gone astray. With their faces only inches apart, Sasuke yelled at Homura, "Don't speak of such things to me when you forced my brother to kill my family." Blood was streaming from the young Uchiha's lips. I don't ask for your forgiveness, Uchiha Sasuke, but please, don't go after my village, they're ignorant of that event." Uchiha Sasuke just laughed and said, "Forgive? You think that I am letting you ask for forgiveness? What do you think of me? I am not a god to let out such a pushover attitude about what happened. I am not Buddha that seeks the path of enlightenment. I seek only the honor being returned to the members of my clan that you have mercilessly killed." Homura collapsed forward in a heap of blood as Sasuke withdrew the blade from his chest and pivoted. Sasuke turned to face Homura again, his expression apathetic. With his body twisted into a Mangekyo, Sharingan said, "If killing every villager is what it takes to get what I want, then so be it. Be it Naruto or Madara." Sasuke looked at Homura with pure disdain. Sasuke then turned to leave, saying, "I will kill all of you." Homura turned pale all of a sudden. This was a monster that they had created, a demon shaped by years of solitude, tragedy, and misguided intentions. Were all of them now under the Uchiha's curse? With a slow closing of his eyes, Homura let a glimpse of the verdant trees pierce his dimming vision. Every tree in the area was visible to him, save for a stump that stood in front of him. An axe was in his hand, and next to it rested a fallen tree that was gradually withering away. Observe the woodland rather than the tree, Homura pondered as he turned around and noticed innumerable tree stumps scattered throughout. But in time, even clearing a tree will eventually cause another, and before long, this forest will turn into a wasteland. All Homura could do was bow his head and close his eyes as the elderly man dropped his axe and started walking. The man who strolled through death's vision was by himself. Idealism is just wishful thinking, but you can't succeed on realism alone either. Homura shielded his eyes from the light and looked down to see small acorn seeds near his foot. He was struck by the blinding light above, making not even a clear blue sky visible. "There is nothing left for me to do but plant trees now that it's too late," Homura said as she knelt down to start digging. "Even a single tree will suffice." With his vision blurry, Sasuke dragged Kusanagi's blade along the ground before making his way slowly towards his followers. Because of Karen's healing power, he had previously recovered, and eliminating the two elders had been an easy task. The poison was still there, which was the issue. Each and every cell in his body was being gradually destroyed by the poison, causing him to experience unbearable dull pain. Jugo, Suigetsu, and Karen ran over to the slumping Uchiha, who had now collapsed to the ground from the unbearable pain. Sasuke looked up, his teeth clenched in pain as raindrops started to fall from the lowering skies. "I refuse to perish. I won't be finished until I've killed Danzo." Sasuke slowly opened his mouth, every muscle movement excruciatingly painful, like a million needles slowly piercing his body and slowly penetrating his skin. Sasuke could feel his jaw tighten as Jugo held his head above his shoulders, and he bit Karen's arm once more. The last few days had been like this, with Sasuke now needing to use Karen's healing powers once a day to prevent the poison from retaliating violently and causing more damage than it had originally caused. Sasuke and his companions have been able to walk for only a few hours every day since then, taking breaks to allow Sasuke to catch his breath. As the days pass, Sasuke's appearance becomes increasingly paler. When the chakra was about to pass to Sasuke, he saw a small, spherical object start to twist in midair. Ripples could be seen spinning around the dark circle before the object eventually spat out a familiar orange. Masked man who was now standing in front of him. The little gust of wind disappeared and the hem of the black Akatsuki cloak danced. Sasuke glanced up at Uchiha Madara's masked face. Above him, the Sharingan eye scowled as rain began to fall and lightning crackled from the sky. Madara asked, as the masked man considered and moved closer to the Uchiha, "Hello Sasuke, has the pain from Kabuto's poison increased since last time you were bitten?" "How many days has it been? 3? 4? Sasuke appeared shocked by this discovery. Madara could not have learned such information so quickly. It was highly likely, unless, of course, the man had been following him through one of Madara's underlings. With a coarse and incomprehensible voice, Sasuke opened his mouth. In the middle of his agony, the Uchiha tried to sit up straight and willed his voice to come out. Zetsu. Of course, you underestimate the power of my information network. Zetsu may not be the best fighter in my organization, but nonetheless he is vital in espionage missions, Madara said, her Sharingan eye twitching slightly. Suigetsu pulled Kabikari Hucho from behind him right away, pointing it at Madara as he menacingly faced the ghostly figure. "What are you doing here, Madara? We've done our part, now leave us or we'll deal with you." Jugo was about to assume his stance when the man in the mask approached Suigetsu with poise. The sword passed through him as if he were nothing more than air, piercing his chest without causing any blood to spurt. "You should get to know your superior, boy," Madara remarked to Mist Demon's apprentice, smirking to himself. Startled by this, Suigetsu swung his Kabikari Hucho sideways, phasing the blade through Madara's chest before whirling around and raising the cumbersome blade into the air. Madara did nothing more than watch as the blade split him in two and shattered the earth beneath her feet. Now, Suigetsu, I didn't come here to fight. If I did, I'd have prepared the materials I need to take all of you out besides. I'm reserving my energy for something later. I do, however, have a deal with you. I won't buy any more of your crap," Suigetsu scowled in response. "The last time we struck a deal with you, it labeled us as international criminals." Madara said, but it isn't for you I'm making a deal with, Suigetsu, I'm making a deal with Sasuke," raising his right hand as if to tell Suigetsu to stop. This confused Suigetsu, who turned to face the heaving Uchiha as the Taka leader in question coughed up blood and got to his feet. "What if I told you that your poison can be cured?" With a look of curiosity, Sasuke focused all of his attention on Madara. "What are you implying?" inquired the younger Uchiha, who had zero faith in the man. Madara continued, walking to face Sasuke face. 2. Face. "There's a chance for you to recover from that poison in your veins. What Kabuto did was a poison not listed in Orochimaru's books, a new one. Although he was a poison expert, he pales in comparison to Tsunade when it comes to medicine and poison." Madara shook his head at the idea of sending Sasuke to Konoha. "Are you suggesting I go to Konoha and demand Tsunade to detoxify the poison within me?" Sasuke asked. He thought it was like sending a lamb to be slaughtered. As Sasuke persisted in his interrogation, Madara responded, "Good lord, no, Sasuke. You'd probably be stabbed by someone like Itachi Kakashi before making even a single step into their border in the condition you're in." After listing a number of names connected to the Slug Mistress, the younger Uchiha asked, "Then what's the purpose of bringing up Tsunade?" Until he could think of just one. He gave Madara a threatening narrow of the eyes and said, "You want me to confront Sakura? But she's in Konoha." The masked man then stated, "Sakura is in AIM, a former base that Akatsuki had when Pain was still alive." Madara continued, "That's where you're wrong, Sasuke. Why is she there? She's trying to convince a former member, now ruler of AIM, to side with the 5 nations in this war as it serves as one of the most important routes between Iwa, Suna and Konoha." Madara said. Sasuke thought about his other choices. Kabuto's poison was causing him pain, acting more quickly than anticipated and quickly moving throughout his body. Since Danzo was still unidentified and may take months to become known, the poison would have obviously finished its job in a matter of days. "What would you have me do?" asked Madara, and for a moment Sasuke let down his guard. "Remember Sasuke, I did you a favor, the least you could do is fulfill mine, and I will know how you would do. I have Zetsu after all. If you can't fulfill your end of the bargain, I promise you that I will kill all of you," Madara finally said to Sasuke, grinning beneath his mask as the space around him started to fold in a spiral and slowly sucking in Hawk. And with that, they were all gone from the clearing, sucking Taka into the tiny void of twisted space. 3 days into the campaign, River Country, 2 a.m. The daimyo was agitated because his nation was about to fall apart. It was just so awful that Konoha and Kiri had their sights set on them. Those damned alliance forces had crept stealthily into his domain like grassland snakes, gnawing away at his defenseless soldiers like dust mites. And if that wasn't enough, there was no sign of the associate who had promised to send help. There were incompetent fools all around him. Yelling and swearing at his men, the daimyo paced around his room. The muffled, covered voice said, "I think this is no time to be lashing out at your subordinates, your highness." Then the source of the voice slowly rose from the ground, revealing in his eyes a man, or rather a creature, dressed in stark black and white. The object was green and jagged, resembling leaves as it opened its maw. Like appearance. Zetsu gazed at the chubby daimyo in front of him with his yellow eyes. Zetsu grinned to himself behind those nearly indiscernible steps, those beady, mistrusting eyes, and that deep, yet steady grimace. Haughty elite who, based on his own army's management problems, appeared to be incompetent himself. By the looks of him, he must be a new daimyo, interfering in military matters when he had no idea where to direct his maneuvers. Where is Madara? Where is that imbecile that had promised to aid us in this war? Isn't it good that he had showed his demonstration of one insignificant village? Yet he can't even show up at the most crucial of time. No wonder you lost all of your members. You are all fools to believe in a misshapen man like him," replied the daimyo. "I suggest withholding that tongue of yours, daimyo." "Sama," Zetsu scowled at this. The other half went on, "Unless you want me to eat you from head to toe, then I suggest that you keep quiet." With a condescending turn of his head, the haughty leader exclaimed, "You? What can a single buffoon like you do to a daimyo such as me? Don't you understand your place, filthy urchin? You are a mere insect compared to us. You should be careful with those words, daimyo. Sama, they will be your utter undoing." Zetsu felt his leader's chakra presence materialize at his side just as he was ready to move forward. A solitary man emerged from the shadowy area, causing the spiral distortion of time and space to enlarge. The man wore an orange spiral mask with the right side hanging open. He spoke in the most polite voice he could manage as he approached the daimyo, his Sharingan eye peeking out from behind the mask. The man in the mask said, "Stand down, Zetsu. Leaders will be leaders no matter how you look at it." Zetsu appeared to give in at this point, but he quickly stood back up again. What would he gain by killing this haughty bastard? Probably a full stomach, but for some reason, he felt that if he did that, it would cause stomach cramps. "Finally, you're here. Where is your promise? My country is suffering because of those power-mongering fools from Fire and Water, and you are dawdling around like the useless organization it was supposed to be. They have just taken over 3 of my most heavily armed fortresses up north and are inching. No, making tracks towards my capital. With a matter. Of fact tone, Madara dismissed the insult and said, I was simply doing some business earlier that needed to be taken care of. I don't care. I want those blasted shinobi out of my country as soon as possible, sacrifice some of my men if need be. I want them out. The daimyo exclaimed, holding up his nose in outrage. Looked like Madara was frowning under his mask. It was difficult to deal with this haughty feudal lord because he had to suppress his desire to kill as well as endure the man's tongue lashing. Whatever the case, he would eventually be spared from hearing from this inept lout in the future. Visible Sharingan contracted in Madara's eyes as the three comas on the red iris slowly started to rotate. Madara spoke up, but the daimyo wouldn't even allow him to finish. I have a suggestion to make, daimyo. Sama. Don't interrupt when I am talking, simpleton. I have the perfect strategy to counter the force sent by the Alliance. It will bolster our allies and surely deliver a victory towards the Federation, Madara said, twitching his visible eye. The chubby boss looked up at this and said, and what do you have in mind, Madara? Do not worry, daimyo. Sama. Rest assured, by the time the forces of the Alliance are visible near the walls of this city, they are as good as defeated, for they have no means of controlling our most powerful arsenal, only a means to seal them away. And even then, the rituals for such a task would be monumental even for the one-tailed beast. This caused Madara to turn his back on the angry commander. Zetsu followed suit, his Sharingan eye twitching to a scowl. Zetsu started talking to the leader once they were beyond his or her hearing. Do you really want to go down with what you said, Tobi? I thought you'd be more reluctant about it. As they left the feudal lord's property, Madara shook his head. On the contrary, Zetsu, I said I would bring victory to the Federation, I'll bring it. I just didn't say River Country would be the one to push them back. Zetsu gave Madara a close look before grinning. You're going to burn this village to the ground, aren't you? That is harsh, Zetsu. Madara said before going on, I am merely playing down on my interest, and my interest lies with the minor countries bringing down the stabilizers of power and cause enough chaos to let them view me as their savior, their god. With that in mind, River Country will be the lamb that will serve as the sacrifice to my altar, to bolster the hatred of the Federation, full force. The man leapt to the tallest building, balancing himself on one foot, and stared intently out at the open fields beyond the city, intently glaring at the approaching opposing army as the full moon shone behind Madara. External. This time, the full moon's light was amplified, so the dead of night did not favor them. Its silvery glow seemed to keep them from accomplishing this. The capital's walls were visible, along with a thick column of smoke rising from the middle. And then there was a faint, humming sound throughout the whole place. Its maw opened and it drooled on the ground below, releasing a river of saliva that started to dissolve everything it fell on. Its bug-like wings emerged from the smog, flapping at an amazing rate. The enormous blue bag started gathering chakra just above its mouth, letting out a sick but deadly screech. Little orbs of dark energy started to swirl at the small but unstable orb, giving the chakra a sinister and malicious appearance. The telltale signs of destruction emerged from two of the armies of the 5 greatest nations as it finished its mission. When Naruto realized what this creature with tails was going to do, he yelled out of fear for the lives of his men. Spread around, that's a devastating attack he's about to do. Don't try to get in its sights. Every ninja started to run around the beast's view as the order to disperse was given, fervently attempting to hide from its wrathful ball of death. The beast in question inclined its upper body forward and extended its wings further, pointing its horn towards the capital's exterior wall. The malicious ball of chakra quickly shrank to a size appropriate for a beast and let out a loud roar. Whack! The energy ball's blast sent shockwaves around the beast and its projectile, and the strong wind's force leveled most of the obstacles in its path, tearing down walls, houses, and other structures, and sending the daimyo's castle tumbling to the ground in ruins. It charged directly toward the mountain that the armies of the Alliance had been running away from. There was only a blinding light visible across the mountain in the last moments of some of the ninjas who were now facing the attack. The mountain that had once been in the way of the chakra blast's destructive path collapsed in a massive explosion that sent pieces of earth flying in all directions. Naruto paled at the sight of the deaths that suddenly entered his vision. He then turned around and growled with righteous fury at the beast that was about to launch its unfathomable attack with renewed ferocity. Naruto needed to move quickly because another blow like that would be fatal to their forces. For a brief moment, Naruto stood there, feeling the flow of natural energy around him. His iris changed from an oceanic blue to a royal yellow, and red rings started to tint his eyelids. Naruto advanced towards the beast faster than a human or shinobi could have imagined. The beast had started gathering chakra in its mouth and was flapping its 6 wings while its 7 were hanging loosely as it descended to the ground. It was flapping higher and higher until it reached the dark clouds above, appearing to have reached the world's ceiling. Lightning danced as the chakra orb constricted and shook due to its unstable nature, absorbing bolts of electricity all around it. The monster in question reared its neck back and let out a loud roar, leaving the remaining survivors of the attack inside the capital with nothing to do but stare in shock. Naruto screamed, "Stoop!" as he raced closer and closer to the location. The beast launched its attack directly at the surface it had been standing on. Naruto tries to approach the scene while the plant man from Akatsuki flees to a safe distance and the projectile's disastrous outcome crosses his mind. He could still clearly recall Yamato's description of the destruction caused by his fourth tailed state, which was the equivalent of a small village being destroyed in the time of his attacks against Orochimaru. Upon approaching the walls, the ball of powerful and malevolent chakra collided with the earth, unleashing a more potent explosion that enveloped the capital in a dome of white light. When Naruto was abruptly pushed back by the attack's sheer force, the impact of the previous attack sent another strong shockwave through the area. All he could do was watch as he was launched backwards like a ricochet, slamming into a precipice and becoming embedded in it. With disgust and terror, Naruto witnessed the transformation of River Country's capital city into nothing more than a crater. Looking up into the sky, Naruto saw that Madara had vanished from the once dominant capital of River Country, leaving only a plume of smoke. Naruto angrily cried, "Damn you, Madara! Damn you!" as he looked at the smoldering ground that was now in front of him. With all of his might, he cursed the heavens as he looked up into the sky. Aim. 2 people were now prepared to leave the city of perpetual rain at the city's edge. For a moment, the Pinkette who was now facing Ain's new leader appeared serious, evoking both sadness and sympathy. Which Konan noticed right away. "What's done is done. Sakura. San, we cannot undo the past, your sympathy only gives me more grief. I merely gave you the hope of saving the ties that you shared with your most trusted friends. You have learned well and I hope that you apply what you have learned." Konan smiled calmly, and Sakura could only pay attention. Shino, who had been ordered to oversee the medic corps and accompany their ambassador to aim back to the front lines, stood by her side. But given the time span Shino provided her in his extremely thorough report, Sakura had wondered if it had taken him longer to reach aim than it had. Sakura opened her mouth to speak, but a hand up stopped her. Turning to face the bug user, Shino just looked to his right and spoke. "There is someone who has suddenly appeared in my net of insects. It is best that we prepare ourselves if there is a possible engagement that might occur." Konan turned her head to see where Shino was staring, alert to this new situation. There was plenty in the silent boy's body language to criticize. The boy was reticent to talk and would often point out noteworthy things with gestures instead of words. As insects now cautiously made their way down to Shino's arms and even up to his face, he maintained his composure. With her gloves on, Sakura appeared focused, as the 3 of them braced themselves for whatever might come. They turned to see what was making the noise when they heard the sound of shoes slowly walking on wet ground. Sakura was taken aback by what she saw. It didn't seem right that the person she was supposed to be pursuing had come to her. It was an amazing stroke of luck for her. She wasn't sure if it was good or bad, because it was the person she had been looking for the previous 3 years, the one Naruto wanted to bring back, the one she wanted above all to save and show him what family looked like once more. Uchiha Sasuke, who had appeared paler to her the last time she had seen him, was standing in front of her, and as blood dropped from his lips, she couldn't help but wonder why. "Sakura," Sasuke said, drawing his blade from its sheath. Kusanagi was prepared to unleash a barrage of electric charges. With his sword glowing from the lightning that was surging at its blade, he calmly walked towards their group and said, "I want you to heal me." He moved slowly in Konan's direction, his sword crackling as lightning danced along its edge. Sasuke just needed to make a quick dash to unleash his power. Sakura, however, blocked him, punching the ground to negate Sasuke's charge while her hands glowed with blue chakra. Sakura exclaimed, "Okashu, cherry blossom impact." Fissures started to form all around the 2 former allies as the ground beneath her shattered like glass, splitting up from the force. After Sakura dealt him a sudden and devastating blow, Sasuke leapt back and gave his former teammate a stern look while she adjusted her gloves. This time, she said monotonely and with complete seriousness, the next time, I'm aiming to your face, Sasuke. Kun. She would no longer worry about beating Sasuke to the point of death or about his safety if she did so. She would do this, just like Naruto, even if it meant pounding sense into Sasuke's head. Sasuke scowled as she continued, your vigilantism ends now. He then turned to face the other female on the other side. With a smile on his face, Suigetsu lifted Kabikari Hucho up to his shoulder and remarked, well now, I thought this whole trip would be boring as hell, I guess I was wrong. Maybe you do have some form of fighting ability, Pinky. Sakura opened her mouth to reply, but Shino interrupted. It would be unwise of you to downplay our fighting capabilities this early. The shinobi wearing the hood was surrounded by flying bugs that were spinning around him like a whirlwind. After all, even the most unassuming can have devastating results, the bug boy went on. Konan turned to paper at that point, and cracks started to appear in her body. The former Akatsuki member said, do not for once. Let your guard down, as innumerable papers gradually folded into shuriken in the shape of origami. Sakura said, squatting down, her right hand still on the floor with its handcuffed into a fist, or you'll be killed instantly. Karen felt the older woman's chakra in each paper she had released as she stared at the papers whirling in the air. Her chakras seemed to have gone everywhere, throwing her technique into disarray, and it felt perplexing. The presence was so strong that she was unsure of how they would overcome the person who had split her chakra in every piece of paper she had seen in this area. Suigetsu, on the other hand, smiled. They had faced cage-level shinobi here before, but each time required a peculiar move that made them adjust to the circumstances. The Zabuza prodigy turned to his left to observe Jugo gradually allowing the cursed seal to partially transform him. His right eye soon underwent a change, with the iris turning brilliant yellow and the sclera turning jet black. The giant of a man spoke, his bloodlust slowly seeping out like a stream. I guess we have no choice then. We'll have to kill the two people around the pink-haired girl, then we'll force her to heal Sasuke. Shino now showed his initiative to attack by dissolving from the insect storm that surrounded him. With his face completely hidden from their view, the bug boy said, I wouldn't be too sure if I were you. Suddenly, Suigetsu yelled, crap. Don't let any of his bugs get near you or you're dead. And swore at this. Shino reappeared behind Suigetsu, who had swung his enormous blade at the Aburame, saying, I would prefer if you would call them insects. Suigetsu cursed as his blade passed through Shino with little resistance. Just as Jugo was about to assist, he was startled to see a paper shuriken just miss him in the face. As the paper shuriken turned back to its owner and reformed on her palm, he looked up to see Konan's winged form with her right arm extended. Sasuke glanced up at their target. Judging by the way her body would be far too flammable, a Kaiden jutsu would probably do. Just as the Uchiha started to perform his hand seals, Sakura approached him slowly and adjusted her gloves. This caused the Uchiha to stop. I'm your opponent, Sasuke. Kun. Sasuke arched an eyebrow out of pure curiosity. How was Sakura going to be able to follow him? He recalled that on their first encounter back at Orochimaru's base, the girl had nearly died at his hands. Sasuke's vision suddenly became blurry as he wondered how Sakura would specifically fight him. As he watched Sakura transform into a haze and back again, he felt the pain of the poison gradually encroaching on his brain. He was gradually becoming incapacitated, which prevented him from being as quick as he once was. It was hard for him to just stand there and wait for Sakura to attack as his hand trembled from the grip he had on Kusanagi. But in his opinion, Sakura would always be the weakest member of their team Team 7, so it wouldn't matter. The force of the attack instantly shattered the ground, causing fissures to form that gave way to the earth below. The ground shook violently. Startled by this unexpected move, Sasuke leapt up instead of backward, only to see Sakura above him, her skin now as black as charcoal, her right fist ready to strike him in the face. Sakura's shadow fell across Sasuke's field of vision, and the Uchiha's eyes grew wide as she realized that the chakra she had been gathering in her right hand had the power to kill him there. Smash. River country, ruins of the capital. It was already morning, and everyone seemed to be thinking about the deafening silence that had once pervaded the once enchanted city after witnessing the devastation wrought by a Biju. By this point, Suna's allies had come in the shape of the Kazekage and his necessary battalions to join the Alliance's forces. He was also able to witness the destruction that occurred in the village prior to its removal from the map. The Kage saw his friend searching valiantly for any survivors of the attack as he made his way through the debris. His hands combed through the debris, bleeding heavily from the cuts they had sustained, making every effort to move wood, metal, and stone out of the way. The blonde was kneeling and searching for any sign of life with his bloodied and exhausted hands when he stopped when he noticed a child's cold hand still holding a doll. His body stayed stiff at the sight that was in front of him for a brief moment, making him appear completely catatonic. He forced himself to stand, gritting his teeth slowly, his rage clamping down like a vice around his head. Naruto yelled, "I'm going to kill him. I'll kill Madara," as he struck the rock beneath him, breaking it into tiny fragments. "I'll put a stop to him." Naruto struck another stone. Another rock said, "I'll find him." The blonde punched the stone, breaking it with the force of his blow. "I'm not going to let another sacrifice happen in his name," he declared. "Naruto." As the blonde turned to face his friend, Gaara reached for his shoulder and said, his eyes were almost tears. "I couldn't do a damn thing. I didn't expect this kind of thing from Madara. I couldn't see what he did to this village. I couldn't save them. This was too pathetic and too horrible to be regarded as a victory, in his opinion." Gaara failed to understand why, though. How come Madara did it? If this village was one of his most valuable allies, why would he want to destroy it? What would it benefit him to just blow this village to pieces? Gaara couldn't help but feel disturbed by this turn of events as doubts filled his mind. Gaara turned to face the rising sun, and as dread started to rise within him, he briefly squinted his eyes. All he could do was hope they were successful. As it stands, it appears that things will soon get considerably worse. Luckily for Sasuke, he barely made it out alive. Sakura's punch broke the log that he used to replace himself. Glancing around, he saw Sakura pursuing him like a vengeful bloodhound. Backpedaling as quickly as he could, Sasuke cursed and leapt to the grove surrounding the Aim village, which resembled a metropolis. Using his arm, he grabbed a sturdy branch, then swung to his right, feeling his weight nearly rip his arm off. He let go of the branch as he landed on a sturdy trunk. He briefly lit up his Chidori just as he saw Sakura's back exposed, but then he felt Kabuto's poison seeping into his system. Immediately upon hearing the sound of his jutsu chirping, Sasuke began to cough up blood. Sakura, on the other hand, flipped in midair, landed on another solid trunk, shifted her weight downward, and leapt tremendously towards Sasuke. With his Sharingan, Sasuke saw this right away as the Pinkette charged at him, her hand glowing blue with chakra, ready to unleash a devastating blow. With a curse deep inside, Sasuke leapt up the tree and onto another, the previous one breaking under the sheer force of Sakura's use. This is similar to the time I faced Gaara in his demon form because she is applying more weight to her Shunshin no Jutsu move, which would have seriously injured me if I hadn't dodged in time. Sakura stood on another branch, this time on the same level as Sasuke, and the Uchiha thought to himself, "It's a good thing that the startup of that technique is slow compared to my speed and too linear that it's too predictable. I must not undervalue her." Sakura knelt down and began to pump chakra to her legs. "Sasuke-kun. Back then when you said, 'Thank you,' what did you truly mean when you said that?" Sakura questioned. The only response Sasuke gave was, "It's not for you to know." Sakura briefly closed her eyes before leaping backward and out of Sasuke's line of sight to the ground below. Sasuke had noticed that Sakura was avoiding making direct eye contact. He smiled to himself inside. Sakura had intended to avoid using the perfect technique to disable someone. It appeared that only a Uchiha or a flawless Jinchuriki could counter such a potent genjutsu. The wind brought with it rustles in the leaves, and silence descended upon the grove. Sasuke did not move as she tried to sense Sakura's chakra. He forced himself to feel something that would signal the girl's movement and tried to focus. At that moment, Sasuke heard a strong rustle and turned to see leaves falling from the trees. He then heard another rustle and turned to see the leaves dancing as they hit the ground. His Sharingan began scanning the area as he sensed Sakura's movement through a rustle. She seemed to be approaching him from behind like a ricochet, hopping over any trunk that stood in her path and changing course. At that moment, Sakura reappeared above, her skin as black as ash, and she lowered herself to Sasuke, her right leg reaching upward as she prepared to deliver a potent axe kick. Satenkyaku, painful sky leg. At that moment, Sakura's leg tore through the tree Sasuke was standing on and eventually crashed through the ground with a loud boom. Sasuke dodged out of the way. Seeing his opportunity, Sasuke leapt into the dust and smoke that shot out from Sakura's position, her Sharingan fully charged. He pulled Kusanagi out of its scabbard, shielding his eyes as he fell to the ground. Sakura saw Sasuke approaching her like a hawk, his right hand gripping his Chikudo as it attempted to cut Sakura down and render her unconscious. Sakura's skin-toned ash produced a high-pitched sound as if two swords collided, and as the sword passed Sakura, the tip emitted a tiny spark. To her credit, she reacted instinctively and leaned to her right, avoiding the slash and the tip touching her cheek. However, Sasuke did not draw blood. Sakura saw her opportunity instantly and cocked her right fist back, hitting him in the gut with her iron enforced fist without gathering enough chakra for a quick strike. The sudden pain electrified Sasuke, and he coughed up blood before the blow sent him flying with such force that he crashed into several trees, got stuck in the ground, and stopped in front of a big stone. Sasuke attempted to stand up, but he could feel the agony of his body returning with all of its force. It was difficult to breathe. A sharp pain shot through his right side, which he cradled in his side. He felt that the last blow had broken some of his ribs. He would have taken full advantage of the punch if he hadn't taken a slight step back. He was suddenly struck with the realization that Sakura had him completely beat up. If she got close enough, she could literally kill him by taking advantage of his current weakness. It was pointless as long as she was out of his line of sight. It was pointless and more difficult to simply catch her as long as she doesn't make eye contact with him. Yes, it was a difficult situation. Sasuke got to his feet. Given her strong defense, he surmised that the only jutsu that could stop her attack was a Doden-based ninjutsu. It was difficult for him to simply pump chakra throughout his body. After all, he is currently unable to form Susanoo correctly, so this was his best option. After placing Kusanagi on the ground and forming an X with his arms, the Uchiha closed his eyes and focused. The chakra's flow appeared to be constrained. He had the impression that exerting himself further would only worsen the effects of Kabuto's poison. Sakura had tried to capitalize at the last minute, so he focused. With a blue energy glimmering in her hand, Sakura bounded towards Sasuke and the Uchiha. She would not have gone for a killing blow. Rather, she realized how valuable Sasuke's information about Madara would be. Konan had mentioned that, despite being aware of Akatsuki's plans and those of most of their bases, Madara had withheld information about himself, most likely because he didn't trust any of his members as much as he did Nagato and Itachi. Each of them had different objectives, but Madara remained the most enigmatic. He came and went at will and visited locations he would not discuss. Madara was sly, cautious, watchful, and more secretive than anyone could ever be. If Madara had shown Sasuke one of his key locations, it is likely that he has a main base of operations there, which Sasuke might know about. Sakura turned around and dashed towards Sasuke, readying himself for a vicious blow to the back that would render Sasuke permanently paralyzed. She had been annoyed that Sasuke was unable to execute jutsu after jutsu when she launched her attack. Chidori had to make the most of what she had even though she could have completed the task on her own. Sasuke had asked to be freed from his illness or whatever was bothering him. In fact, he had demanded it. She may be able to pull it off. The issue, though, was that Sasuke had a lot of questions to respond to beforehand. Sasuke had spread his legs to create a wider base and was shouting angrily while he stretched his hands sideways as Sakura raced towards the Uchiha at her fastest speed. Chidori Nagashi. Chirping of 1,000 birds current. Lightning literally started to eat the iron. Like skin that Sakura had previously adapted as it danced and sparked its way all around Sasuke, piercing Sakura's Domu, Earth Spear. Sakura went straight to Sasuke's position, sliding and entrenching herself a little as she screamed in agony. Her jutsu was gradually fading away, and the Earth Spear's effect was gradually wearing off. Gasping for breath, Sasuke stood over his erstwhile teammate. It was becoming harder and harder to even control his chakra. Now Sakura, you will heal me. Sasuke bent down to try to grab the girl, but Sakura leapt up and gave him a hard punch to the cheek. His Sharingan deactivating was a surprise move. Sasuke had assumed he had finally prevailed in this uphill battle. However, Sakura was completely unprepared for the punch that struck him in the face when he had suddenly leapt up like that. With Sakura's tremendous strength throwing Sasuke back, the blow flapped the opposite cheek that it had struck. After tumbling over the muddy terrain, Sasuke struck a big rock in the rear. Sakura, who had a kunai ready just in case, walked apathetically up to Sasuke. Sakura glanced at Sasuke's unconscious form, which appeared to be motionless at the moment. Just in case, Sakura had drawn her chakra scalpel and started chopping off tendons to render Sasuke immobile. With that, she set out to return to Aang while carrying the Uchiha on her shoulders, determined to find the answers they require and ultimately put an end to this war. Shino vs. Suigetsu. Suigetsu believed he had picked the wrong person to pick a fight with. In fact, it seemed the bug boy had kept him from confronting the ex-member of Akatsuki. He was the woman's weak link. But regrettably, something had happened to stop him from doing so: a Konoha ninja who can absorb chakra with microscopic bugs. Did Madara fail to account for the woman's additional escort? If so, the next time they see that masked bastard, he had better try to think of a plausible explanation. Because there was no way in hell he was going to allow that crazy guy to use them the way he had back at the summit. Momochi Zabuza's apprentice liquefied himself, crawling away from the swarm of bugs that tried to cling to Suigetsu as he got out, and he smirked to himself as he drew Kabikari Hucho once more. Suigetsu was immediately surrounded by insects. He turned to face the bug boy, who was just approaching him while keeping his hands in his pockets and appeared composed throughout the altercation. At that moment, Suigetsu started to feel a little exhausted. He saw that his previous jutsu had used more chakra than was necessary. As Shino extended his right index finger and a bug gently touched the tip of his nail, he silently cursed. "Give up. The fact that my swarm has surrounded you should be an indication of the advantage that I possess and the handicap that you wield." Suigetsu laughed. "Hey, even if you try to consume my chakra, it would be too slow. I'm made of water as such. Your bugs would have a hard time consuming that energy. Are you sure it was wise to pick me as an opponent?" At that moment, mist began to gather around them, and Suigetsu's sly smile transformed into a savage, fang-filled smile. Up to a point, Shino's visible eyebrow rose and then stayed silent. "I know that insects can detect other insects through the release of subtle aromas like pheromones. But if I had enough moisture to dull those senses, I wonder if they would ever coordinate an attack like you do." Ninpo. Kirigakure no Jutsu, ninja art, hidden mist technique, was uttered by the toothy boy as the fog surrounding the two fighters grew thicker and thicker. "I'm not the student of the acclaimed Momochi Zabuza for nothing," Suigetsu continued, "and from what I remember of Zabuza, he was proficient in this style, under the haze of the mist." Suigetsu said, "I prefer a much more direct approach, but I can't afford that to someone like you." The air appeared to be getting slightly colder, and Shino could feel it as he maintained his guard. It is unclear from the outside how much fog has accumulated around the small grove near the water source, which is located just outside of Ames City. Shino stepped to the right and heard a sword being swung down, nearly severing him in two, but he remained composed inside. Just as Shino was about to yank Kabikari Hucho out of Suigetsu's grasp, he made a loud splash with his left foot as he forcefully stepped on the blunt part of the enormous blade. Shino also punched the person who had attacked his back earlier. Suigetsu questioned, "How?" before yanking his sword and leaping backward against Shino's hand. Shino moved forward to face Suigetsu, his expression eerily composed. Suigetsu said in a serious tone, "How did you know I would be coming from that direction?" "I've made no sound, no indication that I would be coming at you from there." Shino responded on his behalf, saying, "No one is capable of producing no sound. I may have not heard you, but the vibrations that you caused are loud enough for insects to detect, like a door being slammed open." Suigetsu then observed that there were fewer bugs flying in the air than there had been earlier. However, it appeared that the aforementioned bugs were crawling all over the ground. Insects have the ability to sense enough vibrations on the ground. They flee whenever they feel that the ground near them is stepped. I took advantage of that trait they have and simply have some of them stay there to detect where you come from. With how they move and how they communicate, I immediately sense it and do the most appropriate action. As Suigetsu hefted the enormous blade on his shoulders once more, his frown changed back to a smile. "Well, damn it. It looks like I'm going to have to put more effort into this than I thought." The air surrounding the two fighters started to condense, and Suigetsu started to liquefy and splash on the ground. The puddle that was Suigetsu then split into 6 smaller puddles, dividing like cells going through mitosis. Then the puddles started to emerge from the earth, resembling a humanoid shape. Together, they resembled a shark-like boy with a heavy sword balanced atop their shoulders. Smiling confidently, they all said together, "Sweden." Mizu Bunshin no Jutsu, Water Release, Water Clone Technique. At that moment, the clones started practicing the Muon Satsujin Jutsu stance, which involves killing silently. As they moved silently through the extremely thick fog, Shino peered down and noticed many of his insects scurrying in all directions, dispersing and creating enough mayhem that he was barely aware that two swordsman clones had materialized on either side of him. One was leaning forward below, poised to chop off his legs, while the other had the blade aimed high and horizontally toward his neck. Quickly responding, Shino spun in the middle of the two clones, allowing them to pass by him while the two clones gaped in surprise at the Bugman. After landing precisely in between the two, Shino picked up some of his insects from the ground, wrapped them around his hands, and raised them in an arc before hurling them all at the two clones in a wave. They experienced a minor chakra disruption, which caused them to instantly dissipate and turn into puddles as they fell to the ground. The Aburame watched his insects wildly moving while glancing at the ground. He was unable to tell which was which. Suigetsu moved with precision, making the most of his colony's vibration sensitivity. There was one thing Shino had to admit about the man he was fighting. He was an expert killer. This time, Shino was the target of 3 identical Suigetsu images that were approaching him. They were all within striking distance as they leapt for Shino's neck, legs, and chest. 2 approached him from opposite sides, and the other one came from his back. Just before the 3 enormous blades could chop him to pieces, Shino quickly replaced himself with a log in an instantaneous rush of seals. The 3 grimaced at the abrupt change as the log splintered and scattered. They had him, they were positive. Shino had abruptly materialized from the side of one clone, slapping the aforementioned clone once on the right forearm before vanishing as a puddle on the floor. Then, from beneath one clone, another Shino materialized. It dispelled fast, revealing a massive swarm that encircled the second Suigetsu clone and devoured the chakra. The insects quickly dispelled the last clone, grabbing the back of its head as they crawled out of Shino's arm. Shino tried to get a response out of Suigetsu, who had remained silent the entire time, saying, "I admit that I am impressed at your skill in using the infamous Muon Satsujin Jutsu. Barely a few members of our Anbu have this level of skill." Shino did nothing but wait for his insects to make their next set of movements. His insects were still in stasis, which made Shino feel uneasy within. Right now, his opponent might have pursued Konan, and those clones might have only been a diversion. He was aware that liquid was a weakness shared by a papermaster such as Konan. His bugs were most likely in stasis because of it. "Now that I have you." There was no sound coming from the man who was now towering over Shino. With his sword held sideways, he strikes Shino from his shoulder blade all the way down to his stomach, remaining as silent as a soft wind and as cold as ice. Suigetsu touched down with one knee. He never needed to turn to face his victim again because he had anticipated blood to flow from that. Clearly something spilled, but it wasn't what he was expecting. Tendrils of bugs had crawled out of the jacket and exposed the boy with the sunglasses on his long-sleeve undershirt. The cluster of insects by his side appeared to be clutching his neatly cut two hoodie. Suigetsu lost all sense of movement as the bugs began to eat away at his chakra. His entire expression was one of shock. This was the 3rd time in his life that he had been taken aback, the other 2 having involved the 2 terrifying Jinchuriki of Kumo and Konoha. Shino cut Suigetsu off with a matter of fact voice. "How did you know that you were going to attack me there? It seems that you have forgotten one of the primary principles of Muon Satsujin." Shino went on. Suigetsu started to tremble as the bugs started eating away at his chakra, reflecting on the single most crucial aspect of Muon Satsujin Jutsu. The most crucial rule in the style Zabuza taught him was to always attack from the back. To do this, one must walk quickly and silently while using the opponent's exposed back as the target. Zabuza's mastery of this technique was largely due to his execution. It seems that you caught on. Indeed, Muon Satsujin is a force to be reckoned with. It's so silent that you will never even realize that you already died. The skill of the practitioner of such an art should not be taken lightly. Even a Jinchuriki could fall given the right preparation and situation. As Shino went on, insects were literally and gradually covering Suigetsu's body, crawling on his skin and eating away at his energy. However, its primary principle is also its main weakness, thus making it predictable. Therefore, a solution on this was to come up with a plan to lure the original user out. A deception to counter a deception, as Shikamaru and Hokage Sama put it. The Aburame then said, "Do not worry, and rest assured that I will be sparing you alive. Your information is valuable in ending such a pointless war," as Suigetsu's body was completely covered in insects. At that moment, Suigetsu lost all sense of reality as everything eventually turned black. Konan versus Jugo. Feel sorry for them. All Konan could feel was the monster that was the tall, orange-haired man moving around, wildly attacking her while she dodged every blow that was thrown at her. Before, the man in front of her appeared calm and uneasy, but now he was a ferocious combatant driven by rage and violence. The man didn't seem to be a violent person. Rather, it seemed as though he detested using such severe force and engaging in combat. Everything about Nagato was so familiar to her, save for this one mood swing. The monster roared, shifting and twisted, growing holes in his back that seemed to be concentrated chakra. "Come back here," he exclaimed. Konan scattered herself amidst a sea of paper cranes, encircling Jugo as he shot chakra beams in all directions. Konan appeared disturbed. This was not the man she had observed before. The previous man had been reserved, soft-spoken, and unflappable. He was susceptible to intimidation. This individual was distinct. He was more bloodthirsty, psychopathic, and insane. The markings he had previously displayed on his face clearly identified one of Orochimaru's experiments, more specifically, the Cursed Seal. All Konan could do was feel a little sorry for the man. Maybe the seal hasn't really vanished yet? No, that isn't true. Orochimaru's life force was tied to the seal. If a tiny bit of life was sufficient to keep the seal intact, then who the hell is this person? Konan saw Jugo's hands transform into another appendage, and he grinned again, wildly. Sasori, whose double agent Kabuto was a spy, claims that people who bear the Cursed Seal undergo a predetermined transformation akin to a beast, one that bestows upon them unique abilities. Furthermore, there was an additional statement suggesting that the seal might have had a slight psychological impact. How, then, is it that the man before her was able to change his form, and why was the seal having such a profound psychological impact on him? Finally, Jugo's hands completed their transformation once more as Konan landed behind him, reshaping herself into the innumerable paper cranes she had previously assumed. When she extended her hand, the paper started to compress into a thin spear that floated in front of her palm like it was designed for flight. The paper condensed into a single shape that was identical to a javelin spear, and the chakra contracted and formed thin. It is a pity that your whole existence was bent on violence and urges you have no control over. Do not worry, for I shall end your suffering. The final paper then lodged itself at the near tip, completing the spear's perfect cone shape. She pointed it at Jugo, whose left hand transformed into an appendage resembling a talon. Konan fired the paper spear immediately, and the object left behind gale forces powerful enough to create a loud boom, entangling the ground beneath it as it traveled at a great speed. Seeing that he was in danger, Jugo allowed the Cursed Seal's full power to overpower him quickly. He then used that other arm to form a shield and stop the spear. When the paper spear reached the shield, Jugo tried to stop it by skidding backwards as his feet dug into the ground. The paper started to scatter, one page at a time, and dirt and debris were picked up and thrown around. Jugo attempted to shift his weight forward by holding onto his left arm with his talon. Like right arm, as though attempting to lessen the force of the collision. After 30 meters, the strain on his left arm became unbearable, causing the edge of his human endurance to break, sending him hurtling towards the ground. Jugo noticed that his left arm was limp and gushing blood as he struggled to stand. He turned to face the former Akatsuki member who was approaching him just as paper started to gather again around her, dancing and folding into tiny windmills. Jugo felt a wave of dread wash over him for the first time as Konan approached him emotionlessly. It circled and whirled around Konan, soon starting to spin at an ever-increasing speed, before the aforementioned items shot in his direction like spinning shuriken. Without hesitating, Konan said, "Kaminari shuriken, paper shuriken." Jugo felt the sting of each blade passing through or embedding itself at him, so he shielded himself with his only functional arm. With a loud plop, Jugo collapsed onto the ground, writhing in pain. Gah! Konan looked at the boy before her. His orange hair reminded her of Yahiko, but Yahiko was never quiet. That was Nagato, and neither of them was a psychopath like this one. Looking up at the woman, Jugo could feel the sympathy in her eyes as she regarded him pleadingly from above. Konan lifted her hand, and paper appeared to materialize into the spear she had previously wielded. Jugo appeared utterly terrified. It is understandable that the woman belonged to Akatsuki since she was an equally terrifying opponent to Sasuke and the blonde Hokage who had trapped him against the wall. Jugo. With a red head shouted, Konan frowned at her and then used her paper spear to deflect a set of shuriken. Konan was caught off guard as Jugo seized the opportunity to take her down. All of it seemed in vain, though, as Konan dispersed and started attaching themselves to his skin like leeches were suffocating him. When Konan emerged from her state, she glanced in the direction from which the redhead had emerged, but she could not see her. Konan found Jugo's form, kneeling and struggling, and held her hand towards it. She was going to pull the trigger. Up until she stopped and closed her eyes. Her love for her friends was more important to her at that moment than rationality, even though it was the wrong and most illogical thing to do. No, this isn't what Nagato believed in, this isn't how he would have done it after meeting Naruto. Jugo fought for a brief while before losing consciousness. Madara's attempt to have Konan killed had not succeeded. Unidentified place. Madara, only by necessity, sat in a chair. He had been trembling earlier. It had been a while since he had controlled a Biju, and he recalled that it had been difficult, convoluted, and downright terrifying. With every additional tale, the Biju becomes more difficult to control. He clutched the arms of his chairs, preparing himself for the searing pain that was about to descend. He turned to face the innumerable collections of Sharingan that were inside the jars on his right. The man who had abandoned his clan out of hatred kept the Sharingan of his deceased family members in jars in a sick and twisted sense of mementos. He gazed at them with a mild fascination and remarked, "Just a few more steps and everything is complete." After taking off his mask and setting it in front of his table, he gripped his face and felt his right Sharingan resurrect. Everything will end, and all will be with me. Iron Country, Alliance Camp. At this point, 5 of the Alliance's 6 leaders had assembled wearing full battle gear. To represent their status as Kages, each of them wore a hat. After 2 nights of fighting, they all sat down at a round table and appeared exhausted. After catching up with them 3 days prior, the Kiri Konoha forces were forced to move. Looking at the young Konoha leader in front of him, Ryudenbi no Onoki was, to put it mildly, dissatisfied. The Hokage was inexperienced in commanding troops after months of this alliance. Maybe that idiot Mifune had been depending too much on emotion. He scowled at the Hokage, who had a perpetually gloomy expression during the campaigns. He was right, Onoki shook his head. He was still a child. Not to mention that the troops' morale was being negatively impacted by the rumors of his incognito. He asked in a harsh and irate tone, "Do you realize the gravity of our situation, Hokage?" "Dono?" Naruto didn't answer. How could he? It was as the Tsuchikage said. "You almost cost us a war with the whole world's fate at stake. Do you think it was easy enough to have control over an alliance such as ours?" The Tsuchikage yelled. In rage, Naruto replied, "Then what was I supposed to do? Do I just let an army guard me while we need most of our soldiers to the front lines? Would I feel safe knowing that the greatest threat to humanity is out there that can bypass most of our men and take me away in an instant? If we want to win this war, then we need to do everything we can. That includes all of us, be it mentally or physically. Don't think that you're the only one who has been doing their best here. You are a cage. You sit at the back as you watch your soldiers fight and die for you in your village. The least you could have done is to have given them the morale that they need the most. Do you not trust your own men?" Onoki yelled. Naruto was taken aback when Gaara expressed his own view. The threat of Madara does indeed put us in a precarious position, now that he has the Federation under his thumb. I've had doubts reasoning that most of the minor countries aren't aware just how important people like us were and how dangerous Akatsuki was. It was a matter of feeding the other villages with information that we lacked. Quite simply, we lost in a war of propaganda for the minor countries, something that we had not been prepared for so early on. We were one step too late against Madara. All of us are to blame for this, not just the commander. The Mizukage nodded her head in response to Onoki's question. The issue here is not the minor countries, Kazekage. Dono. The issue here is that Hokage. Dono has left his post to finalize his skills as a shinobi without ever being there for most of us, without ever informing us. Isn't that one form of neglect? It is indeed true that abandoning your post on such a crucial time is an offense worthy of imprisonment. I admit even I had my doubts that Hokage Dono was clearly not the best choice to become the supreme commander. He isn't ready for a responsibility that would entail being a newly appointed Kage. It takes years to master the craft of leadership. The choice was foolish for all of us in the first place. We had relied on our emotion too much out of desperation. That was when the Hokage spoke. I agree that we had met the wrong choice in the matter in this. It seems the idea that Konoha was the only village that still possessed their host back then had blinded us from the fact that their Hokage is still a young man. I agree that we had made a terrible mistake in this. I'm sorry, Hokage. Dono, you are not meant to be the supreme commander as of now. As the second in command, I will be the one to lead where you left off. It is only right. That is acceptable, but what about Hokage? Dono? Onoki had gestured with his hand. After this is over, we will determine his punishment. However, considering how the Battle of River Country went down and the crucial information he has given us, we should give leniency on the decision, Mifune said, looking at the gloomy leader and closing his eyes as he began to take a deep breath. The host for the Eight Tails, Killer Bee, is he in safe custody as of now? Gaara finally asked after giving the Hokage a brief moment of attention and closing his eyes as well. The Mizukage's visible eyebrow lifted as the Hokage nodded. What plans does the Kazekage have? Gaara looked worriedly at the blonde and said, I just asked if the Eight Tails would be participating in this war. He already knew how to handle this. If he dealt his cards correctly, Naruto would be out of danger and still alive. No, I've decided to place him to an island that is completely safe for him. I know that place as we trained there from time to time when we were younger. He's about to depart in 3 days' time, so we need an escort there to see him off. Killer replied. Shikamaru had remained silent throughout the entire incident, but he realized that Onoki had a point, and Gaara's eye twitched as Naruto listened intently to his side. Naruto was now powerless to do anything. The Hokage said, very well, we shall prepare now for the next meeting and encounter. Upon exiting the tent, the Kage's frowns met the gaze of most of the Junin outside, who were clearly dissatisfied with the way things were going. And already there appeared to be dissent. Naruto got into his tent, laid back on his bed, and peered out. Am I truly this world's savior? Gazing down at his hands, Naruto closed them while his hands trembled. His mind was starting to wonder if he had made the right decision. Was he truly untrusting of his men? Was the world doomed because of him? In a moment of frustration, Naruto punched his bed. He could not have done so if he had acted sooner. Not only that, but he also realized how self-centered he had been and how close the alliance had come to defeat. He bit his bottom lip so hard the blood came out of it. He had let everyone in Konoha down, including his sensei, father, mother, and everyone else. Did his fire will reach this far? Frustrated, he clutched the sides of his head and his face with his palms. He was ultimately a failure in every way. Hokage. Sama. The figure uttered as Kakashi entered the tent and Naruto glanced up. Kazekage. Sama has told me to come and get you to talk in his tent. It seemed urgent as he himself approached me along with Shikamaru. You have to hear what he has to say, Kakashi said, drawing inquisitively from Naruto. With a nod, Naruto got out of his tent and moved to the side of the camp occupied by the Suna army. Many of the people who knew him there instantly bowed in respect, and some even gave him a smiley wave. All Naruto could do was wave back, grinning of his own. As soon as Naruto arrived at the large tent with the wind character carved on top, he went inside. Seated at the table, Gaara bided her time until the blonde arrived. Gaara commenced, Naruto, I want to discuss with you about what happened earlier. Naruto sat down right away. What happened earlier was a mistake in all of us. The old Tsuchikage, though he was better than before, is still pompous and too realistic. He has made mistakes just like you did, but he had never once admitted to them until recently. Do you get where I'm coming from? Gaara asked, and Naruto nodded as the red-headed, I know it is wrong of me to take away your freedom of choice as to participate in this war, but remember that we are the only barrier that is preventing Madara to get his hands on you, and we have to rely on the most competent of people to get the job done. Though you might not like it, I feel it is the only way to keep you alive and away from Madara's grasp. But my responsibilities here will only result in your capture. Gaara cut him off. Then he told the brunette, with things the way they are now, we need a unified commanding center. I think you can do it, but the doubts set upon by the Tsuchikage and the Hokage had been great. If this continues, then before we might even know it, we would lose the war. Naruto got up and said, How am I supposed to protect them then? How am I supposed to be safe from my enemy if I can't do anything? Naruto, it is true that what you did was very reckless, you left your office but at least you had to do it because of one thing. I've realized it now more than ever, that what you did was both of foolishness and brilliance. Gaara reached for the scroll. This scroll was a report on what happened days before your inauguration. I can understand the need of you to finally take control of what it was that hindered your progress. Even if you cannot participate in war, your rage would have most likely taken over and we would have a problem worse than Madara, Kyuubi's inevitable return if you didn't do it. Gaara responded, and Naruto nodded and replied, that's right, I needed to do it, I gave in to my rage when Danzo mentioned that he had my mother killed. Even right now, I'm still angry at that guy. It is such a shame that it had come to this. In the end, even if the world is at stake, politics still shapes this world. Gaara murmured. Naruto had no choice but to concur. That evening, as the two young leaders talked, Naruto became increasingly aware of what he had to do. When both had finished for the night, Naruto thought, but in order to do it, I'll need the help of the Eight Tails host. Naruto grinned wistfully and said as he entered his tent, setting the quadrilateral hat in front of his chair. He had made up his mind. The following morning. You're what? Killer E questioned, completely perplexed by the young leader's speech pattern. You said you wanted a form of punishment, right? Well then, accept my proposal. I'm willing to take the fall if the alliance fails. Naruto replied with a smirk. But to relinquish your title aside from being sent to the island with B. San this early on? What on earth is going through your mind, Hokage? Dono? Onoki asked, shaking his head in disbelief. It's simple. We'll only bicker if this continues on. We can't have a fight like this over past mistakes. This is all our faults, but I'm willing to take the blame for this by agreeing to the punishment. I'm willing to relinquish my title as the Hokage with a 3-year exile from my homeland if it meant winning this war and stopping you all from committing senseless mistakes like I did. I've sent a team of messengers already for my predecessor and she'll be here in 3 days' time. In the meantime, I will participate in most of the plans already laid out. This is my solution to the problem I've caused. I have to pay for the price itself since I was the one in command of our troops and I was completely caught off guard at being the supreme commander. As the only thing that could set him free from all of this garbage, let him go, and put an end to things once and for all. Naruto hoped that this would succeed. This is the most alive that his prankster self has ever been. This would be his greatest trick to date, and he would be going after Madara and the entire world. And even if it means losing his title, by God, he'll kick that son of bitch's ass. It was definitely time to finish this. Gaara had merely nodded and asked Naruto, what would you gain if you sacrifice your title as Hokage? Wasn't it your dream to become one? With a slight smile. There's no denying that, and right now, I'm happy that I've finally experienced what a leader is like. A leader, Naruto said, giving Gaara a thumbs up. For once, Naruto raised his head and spoke again, appearing resigned to his fate. Is willing to give up everything for the safety of his people. Though it appeared as though Gaara would have none of it, the blonde was actually correct. To be a great leader, one must first give up everything, even everything he knew and loved, if doing so would ensure the success of his people. With stunned expressions on her face, Terumi Mei remarked, I've never seen a man act so foolish yet wise at the same time. That is the Uzumaki Naruto that I once knew, smiled Gaara. Naruto grinned widely and toothily for the first time in a long time. Aim, after 3 days. 3 days had passed since his capture, 3 days since his healing, and now he found himself imprisoned in a prison where his hands were bound with seals, preventing him from using ninjutsu to escape. Suigetsu was treated the same way as he was, with the only difference being that he was wearing mouth restraints. Sasuke didn't want to know and would probably leave it at that. Sasuke-kun. You probably know that you guys are now criminals in the eyes of the world? His former teammate asked him, as he looked down at his bound hands and heard the loud opening of the metal bars as Sakura and Konan arrived in his cell. Sasuke kept silent because he didn't care. All that mattered to him was getting his vengeance and giving his dead clan's honor back. Sasuke responded, I could care less if I'm a criminal or a saint. My target is Danzo, and I want him dead. Sakura scowled at this, but Konan intervened and shook her head. Uchiha-san, I'm a former member of Akatsuki, and I know why Madara wants me dead. But if I must ask, if you want to roam this earth free and in search of Danzo, I can do that. All I ask is the location of where you headed out before you came here. What's it to you? Sasuke inquired after taking a quick glance at the woman with blue hair. I want to end this senseless war that Nagato and Yahiko has hated. I want it to stop. I don't want AIM to be destroyed again. If you know what it means to honor the memory of your loved ones, then grant my request. Sasuke didn't say anything for a while. Prior to saying, Madara would kill me and my team if that were to happen. Sakura spoke again, saying, if you tell us where Madara took you after the summit, we can give you your freedom. Sasuke, however, managed to smirk, saying, really? Then do tell me, how are you planning to do that? Only the cages can give clemency to a criminal, and last time I've noticed, you aren't Naruto. Sakura inquired, who said anything about clemency? Konan appeared to have realized that they shouldn't have allowed this dangerous man to escape with such ease. Sakura continued, on the condition that you don't harm any citizen here or continue on with the assassination, we can let you off scot-free. That is, if you cooperate, if not, then we can associate you as Madara's accomplice. While he was listening carefully, Sasuke grinned and added, I could care less of that senile old fool. However, if you do grant our freedom, then I will do all your stipulations. Just don't say anything about why I'm doing this. To Sakura, he was expressing disapproval. Uchiha Sasuke then began to speak, covering everything that had transpired since the summit. Beyond AIM. Throughout the 3 days that Sasuke and the others were in captivity, Karin had remained hidden. All she could do was watch as each of her allies was defeated and apprehended. It was her good fortune to have escaped. Karin understood what would happen if she was discovered. Since AIM was still under lockdown, the Hokage's approval and that of the village's current leader allowed the Konoha shinobi to enter. She felt the familiar chakra of someone following them as she looked around. She hadn't given this much thought in a while, but it felt like this familiar person was constantly following her and watching her. But why, exactly, was the question. She sensed that the familiar presence following her was underground and that it had been following them for some time. Initially, she believed Sasuke was the target, but it turned out to be her. She realized as soon as she took a seat. Zetsu was pursuing her due to the knowledge she possessed. She would also die if, at any point, she let her guard down and told Sasuke what transpired after he passed out during the summit. Following the summit, Karin had already concealed the Uchiha clan's identity for several months. She knew that Sasuke was their only hope of taking down a formidable S-class missing nin, so she kept quiet to him. Sasuke and their team would have most likely perished from his compulsive behavior if she had told him back then. Karin knew she had to keep her mouth shut, so she didn't want that. However, it appeared that Madara was prepared to maintain Sasuke's subjugation. Karin's realization struck her immediately upon having those thoughts. If they were to survive, she had to release Taka as soon as possible.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.